Okay, so hello everyone. We're going to start the stream, and sorry I started late because it takes a while to get set up as always. So let me just check this here. It sounds like it's working. So again, I'm very late on this, both in terms of days, because I meant to do this about 2 weeks ago, and also starting late today. I meant to start a couple of hours earlier, but logistics, takes time. So let's get to the gist of it. If anybody's seen that key video I did right a few weeks ago, I took it down because it had some personally identifiable information on people that didn't want to go public, like meaning they wanted to be private. I'm gonna edit that video to take out the people, and then I'll re-upload, right? And if you haven't seen it, or you have, the gist of it is, the world is being run, as we all know, like that's pretty much a given at this point, by people, pulling strings behind the scenes. But that's pretty basic knowledge. That key video was talking about something I call the key, and that's known by various other terms, right? Like when I discovered it, I called it the key of the universe, because it pretty much tells you how everything works, and things aren't such a big mystery like people think stuff has to be, because in reality stuff is pretty obvious if you just have that key to understand things with, instead of getting all confused all the time and stuff like that. So okay, so some other terms for it are like the creator, the force, and of course we all know the G word, which I don't like to use because it causes people to become fanatics, both for and against it. So if I start using the G word, everybody reflexively has their own idea of it, and therefore anything else they hear, they automatically dismiss because they're effectively been brainwashed, right? So again, that's both for what they perceive as the G word, or against, meaning we all know that the world is full of atheists that think church is ridiculous, and they're not wrong in that, but unfortunately they're doing what that term is, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So you have the way churches preach, which is a lot of bathwater, even though there's some good stuff in there, but it's mostly bathwater. And then they throw out the whole idea of there being a unifying force and everything, which of course is the height of stupidity, right? Because if you look at how anything in reality works, there's actually common patterns to everything, and that's not a theory. That's at this point it's becoming pretty well known that there seems to be some unifying patterns. So that key thing I discovered over 10 years ago pretty much unifies how everything works in the universe, and for the last almost 13 years I've been trying to bring that out, right? And so people are wondering, what does this have to do with earthquakes? So the way it works is, it became obvious to me, both on finding that key, like personally myself, and keep in mind this is separate from any schools, any churches, any religions, any of that. This is just one guy who was reading a lot of books and was trying to figure things out, because I had a lot of pain and suffering going on at the same time too, so I wanted answers. Okay, so the two things that become apparent is what happened to me was that I realized this key is, okay, to talk about this key now, this key of the universe is most easily described, if you can call it that way, through symbolism, right? So it manifested the most obvious way you can manifest it, meaning, okay, you know, I'm going to show somebody else the creator, let's say, right? You know, it's in a symbol, right? It's not in some big book full of jargon and gibberish and I don't know what. Because yes, you can write that book, and that's part of what I've been trying to do, is put together all the knowledge of how stuff works. But basically, you know, it all comes condensed into one simple symbol, right? So after I found that key, it was like, well, when you know that I'm seeing this key everywhere now. Like you look on brand names, you look at TV shows, they're having logos with it. You look at the government and their buildings, and it's all over the place. So what became apparent is two things. The first is that, contrary to what I first thought, I thought, oh, I'm like the only person that knows about this key. Isn't that weird? And, you know, I have to show people. I realized right away, relatively soon, that actually lots of people know about this key, and they're always showing you, like they're always putting it out in public, but they never explain it, right? So it's like you'll see it in a brand name, but it's not like anybody tells you, oh, by the way, that's you know, symbolic for the creator, right? Which of course sounds ridiculous to people, but if they look at symbolism, all symbols return back to one, you know, the ultimate symbol that's been going on for tens of thousands of years, right? But because we're at the end times of this age, everybody's been brainwashed to be some sort of weird atheistic. They're either like completely atheistic or they're a religious fanatic, and both extremes, of course, are missing the point. You know, excuse the pun, right? But okay, so now, but something else became apparent too, and that's that people that know this key are at such a different level of thinking, like of how they see things, of how they act, how they behave, and their goals, and their their agendas, if you will, for their life and the groups they belong to, that they're effectively completely different than everybody else. Okay, so I meant to have a talk on this because I meant to have lots of presentations, but unfortunately this is off-the-cuff presentation because, you know, we're having this earthquake issue now in November, which the date right now is October 21st, I believe, 22nd, and I'm gonna show you guys on the internet what the date is by using Google. Okay, so basically it's kind of a rush job to get this out there, and I'm quickly skimming all the other topics that should have had their own, you know, talk and presentation and all that. Okay, so one of them is that, like we said, the people that know this key, or the creator, or the real G, also in Masonry it's the great architect of the universe, which you can see is very close to the key of the universe, because it's pretty much the same thing, obviously. So the premise is, when you're seeing in the media, when you see aliens, extraterrestrials, etc., you know, most people, again, they have the same problem. They either take it literally, which is a mistake, or they think it's all a joke and who cares, which is another mistake, because the reality is that whole alien business is an analogy, okay? When they're talking about aliens, and especially extraterrestrials, okay, what they're talking about is people that know this key, or you know, the G, or the great architect, the force, you know, the creator behind all things. It's also the root truth of everything. That's another way to look at it rationally, is to think of it as the truth, right? Like the ultimate truth, instead of all the lies. So the point is, like, why? Well, why? Because we went over that. They think different, okay? Somebody that sees reality through this force, like this root truth of all things, they're not gonna be part of your civilization, because your civilization, if you're a normal average person, is basically, you know, a bunch of people that have been brainwashed, like, to get to the point. Like, everything you know and believe has been fed to you through the media, through books, through schools, through your friends who, you know, have all been brainwashed themselves. So, you know, the chances of you thinking rationally are almost non-existent, okay, compared to these guys that think of the universe through the key or the great architect or whatever. So the point is, if you have like 1,000 people that think Santa Claus exists, okay, let's use that example. So you have 1,000 people that think Santa Claus exists, and every Christmas they believe some big chubby guy comes through their chimney, drops stuff off, and leaves on a sled. Okay, they're gonna behave and believe and have a routine to their life, like their goals, their aspirations, the way they think. They make a culture. So you have 1,000 people that have a culture of Santa Claus. Now, if somebody comes in there and doesn't believe in Santa Claus, right? For now, keep it simple. Don't even, debate if what this one person believes is true or not. Just think that he doesn't agree with Santa Claus. He thinks, a big egg comes through the sky and lands on his head every Christmas, okay? So the point is that one person is an alien now, okay? Because he's not part of the culture that everybody else shares, okay? So that's what alien actually means. It has nothing to do with all these ridiculous things the media shows you, because that stuff is true, but it's true in analogy, right? Which is like the aliens come and they take over people's thinking, or they buy them out, or they psychically control them. You see that a lot in video games, of course. And what they're trying to show you is people that are not part of your culture somehow came in and manipulated certain people in your culture and turned them over to their bidding, right? Whether willingly or unwillingly or through money, right? Which is a big motivational force. And of course, that's your reality, right? Reality is that you have a culture of people that are pretty much brainwashed and atheistic and or religious fanatics, which are, at the end of the day, both equally lost and confused, right? So, if you have all these people behaving like that, if you have a few people that come from outside and have a different agenda, like don't think those things, don't behave like that, those are technically aliens, right? Which is, in law, the term alien has been going on for thousands of years, right? Because if you look at legal terms, alien has been used for hundreds of years, even longer, to simply mean an outsider to your culture. Okay, so now to get to the extraterrestrial thing. Now here's where it gets interesting. So extraterrestrials, believe it or not, are considered different than aliens, even though sometimes they're lumped together. But in the media, when they talk about extraterrestrials, right, and you see this a lot with ancient technology in video games, or there used to be this ancient race of using a Stargate and all this stuff. What extraterrestrial means, and this is where we get back to the key and the G word and all this stuff to do with stuff that's seen as religious, even though it's not that religion people normally think about. Okay, it actually means you're off world, right? Means you're actually, and your people are like, well, how does that explain anything? Okay, we're gonna keep going here. So what it actually means, terrestrial, is a play off the word worldly. Okay, it means like you're of the earth. So if you look at zoology, right, if you study animals and you look at how the zoologists term animals, it's very interesting, because if an animal walks, crawls, slithers, if it does anything, it's called locomotion. If the locomotion it uses, right, meaning how it gets around, it goes on the earth, it's called terrestrial, right? And if you're talking about birds or anything that flies, like if something gets from point A to point B, not touching the ground, so they have wings and all that stuff, they're considered extraterrestrial, meaning they're not on the earth, they're off the earth, right? And people see, and you gotta remember something, people. This is the mind games that's played on people that these Illuminati guys do all the time, right? And most people don't get this stuff because they see it either as a media, like it's fantasy, it's fiction, who cares, or they're taking it literally, right? Which of course makes more fanatics. So when you understand this stuff, you can see the analogies that are constantly being given to you. So to continue on quick, Okay, so when they're talking about extraterrestrials, it's a play off the Bible phrase where you're not of the earth, meaning you have a spirit. Basically means you're spiritual, right? I know a lot of people are finding that hard to believe, and what is he talking about? Because if you're not spiritual, you're always caught up in worldly things like making money, chasing girls, eating fatty food, whatever. It means you're base, right? That's what it means. It means you're base. Your existence is like an animal. It's like you're on the ground. That's all you think about. You have no higher aspirations. You don't have the wings to fly and think big, like to see things from a big picture and this and that, right? So this was going to be another presentation, right? Like, because right on that alone, there's so many media reference materials on that. Like, basically when a person gains wisdom and insight, right, usually related to the key, they become extraterrestrial, meaning they levitate off the ground, and you'll see that all the time in video games and books and movies, because it implies you now have wings. You're no longer bound to the earth because you're no longer base and earthly. You're no longer behaving in a worldly matter, right? So the normal people, the most typical term are the masses, the peasants. In some books and movies, they say vermin, all kinds of whatever derogatory terms or neutral terms. It means so they're basically the terrestrials, okay? And people that play video games, you know that a lot. It's like the terrestrials, the humans, they're always caught in some intergalactic war. And Mass Effect was a good one because, the sovereigns came back and they started harvesting everybody. And, this is all a play off what's happening in reality, because you have the extraterrestrials running stuff, meaning the most spiritual people, the Illuminati, the illuminated, and they control facets of the world that to the average person are like aliens, right? Because people don't realize how many factions are hidden behind society, because they assume everybody's like them. Like, you think, well, if I get up, go to work, and pay my taxes, and that's all I think about, therefore everybody else must be the same, right? And that's a notoriously well-known deranged way of thinking called transference, right? Like, where you transfer. There's another word too, like displacement or something, I forget, but transference is one of, I think, the way they call it in psychology, which means you will view everybody else as you think, right? And needless to say, that's a really backwards way of thinking, because if you live long enough, you're supposed to know at some point not everybody thinks like you. In fact, there's people that have much more different upbringings and ways of thinking and all this stuff. So to get continue on to the point here, the aliens are notoriously different than you. That's why they're alien, because they don't share your thinking, right? They don't see things the same, and their agendas aren't the same. And the extraterrestrials, the Illuminati, the illuminated, they know this key thing, the G word or the creator, whatever you want to call it, and they run the show. Okay, so that key meeting I posted up, which I'll post up again soon, was like a crash course in that, right? And unfortunately it sounded a bit negative because I was rushing, and I tried to include some earthquake stuff there, but I only skimmed on that, because this presentation will be showing you the details of how they tell you this stuff, right? Because part of, to get back to that key thing, but when you understand there is a key, like a root truth to everything, and there are people that know it, inevitably you come to the realization that the two types of people don't mix, meaning the animalistic base atheists and religious fanatics and everybody in between, they're basically like clueless, right? Like, and I hate to say this, but this most likely includes you, right? Which is the problem, which is why I started this channel, and I have to put this out there as fast as possible. But it's very simple, okay? People have to throw away this religious connotation of all these topics and think of it in common sense terms, okay? You and somebody else are applying for a job to work at an engineering firm, okay? And this firm, let's say, builds trains and buildings and who knows what, okay? Just imagine all the most fascinating mechanical engineering feats, you can think of, from massive buildings, massive vehicles, whatever. Now, if two people get hired to work there, right? And one guy says, okay, I've taken engineering, I took electrical, whatever. I'm just gonna check how my stream is going here. It took whatever, they're gonna, then they get hired, and they're gonna be like, what do you call it? Sorry, I'm just checking my stream here. They're gonna be expected to do something that the boss wants them to do, right? So to continue on, so basically, two people apply to a place, they get hired, right? And now the team director says, okay, we're gonna build a big building with a train going through it or something, and we have to build the train, the tracks, and the building, and all that, right? So imagine if one person got trained in how to do that, and he knew electricity, he knew mechanics, he knew engineering, and he knew enough to go ahead with what he was told to do, right? Now imagine if there's another person, and the other person never took school, right? He only took grade 5 math, grade 6 shop is a word for woodworking and stuff like that. So the point is, this guy never got past grade 8 in courses that teach him mechanics or engineering. They're very basic. Obviously, it's completely useless to building a train or whatever. So the point is, if both of them get hired, the guy that took lots of courses that are relevant in how to do stuff, he's going to be able to do his job, right? Whereas the other guy is not. The other guy is going to say, well, I think this is how this works. I hope this is how that works. I don't know. Let's try this. So the point here is you can see that these two people can't mix, right? Because the one guy will know what he's doing and will say, look, this is how this works. Here's the formula for electricity. This is how we got to run the wires. This is how we got to, do the wattage and whatever. And the other guy has no idea what's going on, but he wants to keep his job, right? He's like, well, I want my paycheck, so I'm just going to pretend I'm working, right? And what people don't understand is this is the problem with society, right? And what's crazy is the Illuminati understand this, right? The Illuminati know, there's very few people that can run a society and be good people, generally speaking, when times are tough, because everybody can be good when there's resources. Like when everybody has food, everybody has space, everybody has a job, it's very easy to be good, right? Because you don't have any needs that aren't being fulfilled. So if I'm always fed and I have lots of food, I don't have to go, rob the next guy and take his food, right? So technically everybody looks good, like you look like a productive citizen and you're a good person, whatever. But the Illuminati knew thousands of years ago, right, when they're running their civilizations, that all civilizations go through phases. Like they start, they build up, like in America, that's like the pioneer days, right? Like 150, 200 years ago, 250, whatever, where they came, they settled, they worked hard, they started their thing. And so everything looks good, but what people don't realize, and we're seeing it play out now 110%, okay? Because you got to remember too, I was trying to talk about this stuff over 10 years ago, and people weren't so receptive, but now we're getting to a point where it's also obvious. It's like you can't deny it, right? And that is that as civilizations continue to grow, people start becoming decadent, right? They become comfortable, they become complacent, right? So put it this way, your grandparents work hard to build something like a house, a farm, whatever, and they gave their kids a good future. Now their kids, they went to school, they got good jobs, okay, and they're working hard. And what's happening is the kids of all these people now, they're at a point where overpopulation is occurring. There's like a lot of people And I understand a lot of people say, oh, we're not overpopulated, but it's not just about literal population amounts. It's about the fact that there's so many people and they don't know how to get along, right? Like they become comfortable, they become complacent, and that complacency becomes decadence, where it's like, well, shut up and leave me alone, just let me watch my porn, let me eat my chips, I don't care if I get fat, who cares if I'm honest, as long as I can rip off the other guy, right? And we can see a mile away, society's deeply entrenched at that stage right now. It's at that stage of decadence. And these Illuminati guys, they've saw this so many times in the past that that's where they get into the religious aspect of the end times, right? Where a civilization starts, it grows. It has like a peak where it's like, like a good stage where people are kind of acting decent, they're working, there's a good blend between hard work and happiness and whatever. But as that peaks out, it becomes, everybody kind of only looks after themselves and looks for their own gain. And that's when you also start seeing the resource issues, right? Because again, I'm fully aware that the Illuminati can put out technology to solve practically every resource problem, right? But what people don't understand about that, because they're like, well, how can the Illuminati be good if they don't do that? Because they're not factoring in, all you're doing is postponing that curve. So if the Illuminati tomorrow say, okay, we're coming out with free energy devices, we're gonna give you matter construction and deconstruction machines so you can make hamburgers out of rocks, and everybody they don't have to work, they can just get all this food, all this money, all this space, all this time. So it doesn't mean you're not going to end up with a resource problem. It just means you're prolonging it. So instead of having a peak at resources after, let's say, 300 years, you're just going to have maybe 1,000 years, right? So after another 500 years of total decadence, like crazy selfishness and decadence, then instead of having 7 billion people, well, now you're going to have 700 billion people, and then you're literally running right. You're going to have a person on every second meter on Earth, right? And then you say, well, why don't we go off into space? Yeah, but there's even space has so much space, right? Like, so are we going to colonize a gas giant? No, because there's no solid rock on that. So, okay, let's say you go to Venus, let's say you go to Mars, which are all pretty small compared to Earth. So the point is, to get to the point, is that people that are animalistic, right, that don't have these higher form of knowledge, which was the key, right? And I did the talk on that, and I'm going to repost it after I blank out people's privacy issues there. The point is that there always comes an end time, right, where after the civilization grew and plateaued and peaked and became comfortable, and everybody now thinks they know everything, but nobody can get along. It's the time for the clearing out, where you have to eliminate, unfortunately, you have to reduce the population, whatever you want to call it. And it also ties in with the ages, right? Because there's an age of the zodiacal procession, right? So you have a procession of the equinox, or whatever you call it, where the Earth rotates around the sun, and it goes for around 2,500 years. It's in one age. So what these Illuminati people did, because they said, well, how are we going to make this process fair, right? It's not fair if you start a civilization and you just decide to wipe most people out one day and they don't know about it, right? So in order to make it fair, what they did was they set it up. All the religions, they had an end times, and in order to make it fair, it was set around an age, right? So for example, Rome was, I think, was Romans, the big Roman Empire. I forget, but I think that was in Mars, right? And if you guys are into astrology, Mars is very warlike, right? It's I think it's behind Aries, which is Aries is Mars, right? It's like another word for Aries. And if you know any Aries people, they're just they're crazy combative, right? Like they'll never I read somewhere which I think pretty much nailed it. But one of the downsides of Aries is they'll never put their sword down. Meaning, if you're in an argument with them or you have a disagreement, you can forget about even thinking you have a chance of winning, because it doesn't matter how right you are or your perspective. They just won't let they just won't let themselves lose. That's it. And they'll do everything possible, like to win over you, regardless if they're right or not, right? So Mars is war, right? Aries, god of war, and the video game, of course. And the point is, as we know, Romans were notoriously warlike, right? That was a very warlike society, from the gladiator games to how they kept going around taking over everybody, right? They took the swords, they took the spears, and off they went. And, if people didn't want to become a part of Rome, well, be ready to, get taken over physically, right? Like through war and violence, right? So the point is, Christianity was the age of Pisces. Okay, and that was the last 2,000 whatever years, and as we know, actually Rome became Christian, right? Because that's what happened there. They went from Mars to Pisces, from Aries to Pisces, I mean. So to get to the point here is, we're at the end times. This should be obvious to anybody now. Like if anybody I give this link to, they probably know all this already, and if they don't, this is gonna help them touch up on that a bit. So the point of this video, though, because I have to give a little backstory, is part of the end times, as we know, is the whole revelation process. And depending on your source of media, okay, because I might cover some more. Like the premise of what I was doing is just to show some articles that, if you read between the lines, tells you when the earthquakes are going to be, right? And because they've been showing this earthquake thing for years, okay? Like if you play video games or read books or do anything besides looking at your wall all day, you will have seen this repeatedly. Okay, you will have seen this message being told to you that there's going to be earthquakes, and massive ones, for years now. Okay, years. So and what happened though is, like, I always wondered, well, it's obvious they're trying to tell us there's going to be earthquakes. But the problem is when, right? Because there's no point worrying about something if you don't know when, right? So what happened is, a few months ago, I came across an article that, when I read it, I was like, my goodness, this is blatantly telling us there's going to be earthquakes. What seems to be around November, right? But it was only one article, and this was in April, and I'm going to show you guys that article. But then what happened is, a few weeks ago, like 2-3 weeks ago, I came across a video, and that video was blatantly telling us November, right? And what's interesting is, because I don't pay attention to politics, I didn't even know there was an election coming up, right? Like, who cares? I don't care, right? But and then people told me, like, that's the election time, right? And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, well, in November, it's when they get the person voted in. And then I realized, oh boy, because it all comes together then. Okay, so you see, so without trying to sound too scary, it looks like, the end times are about to begin. But if you don't like to hear it that way, because they already have begun, obviously, right? But they're gonna how can this best be explained? Like the signs of the end times have been happening clearly for a few years now. Okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean people were in that heavy duty tribulation period, right? Meaning the signs were there, and things were happening around the world, but the hardcore nitty gritty that everybody kind of doesn't want to think about, which is the World War III, the earthquakes, the plagues, the flooding, stuff like that. Those are set for a very short amount of time, but to cause the most damage, right? So that the earth clears itself away, and then they can start a new age. Okay, so when I seen that earthquake thing, I said, oh boy, and then I was told about the election, and that made sense too, because that's part of the Illuminati card game. And if anybody knows about that card game, the tape runs out after some election thing, like somebody, that guy who's Trump, obviously, right? I didn't prepare that link, but I'll try and find it. And what happens is the guy who's obviously Trump in the Illuminati card deck game, he gets assassinated or something, like something weird happens, and then there's only a few cards left after that. It's like tape runs out, and then of course there's a world card, like a new world or something, right? But tape runs out obviously means the show stops, right? Meaning when the tape runs out, there's no more show, right? Which means the puppet show, right? Because everybody should know everything's a puppet show, right? All the politicians are controlled. Your media stars, from Justin Bieber to whoever, to Arnold Schwarzenegger, they're all controlled. And that's obvious, right? It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. And in fact, Justin Bieber had an article that had me worried about October, but it wasn't specific to earthquakes, right? But I'll bring that up as well, because you can see how loaded the whole article is, right? And I was going to do a video on that. And what I ended up doing was just linking it like in an email. And I told people, okay, you know what, I'll break it down in a stream. So this stream is going to be doing all that. It's going to be breaking down the earthquake articles. It's going to be showing you a video on how easy it is to cause earthquakes, because that's something at this point that's pretty common knowledge, right? A lot of people don't know that controlling the weather, it's not a possibility. It's in fact being done. If you look outside your window and it's actually normal weather, anybody with half a brain can tell that's unusual nowadays, right? If you have like normal looking weather, that's a rarity, right? Because most of the time they're controlling the weather, and it's always ridiculous. Like the skies are all hazy and dark, the clouds look all weird. It's like either too cold or too hot or this and that. It has nothing to do with what they're telling you is causing it, right? I don't want to talk too much about that, because I'll get banned from wherever I put this video, because you get banned for that, right? Anything against the narrative, meaning the politically correct agenda narrative, will get you in trouble, right? Which is why we know we're in the end times, because that's part of the 1984, right? Where you can't speak honestly, you can't speak the truth, right? The first casualty of war is truth, right? So, and that we can see that nowadays, right? Anybody that says anything even remotely getting close to the truth, well, now they're, everything from a terrorist to pedophile to I don't know what. It's like automatically they're the enemy, right? And they have to get rid of them. So okay, so let's go here. So we're gonna do the earthquake thing, and we're gonna start with a very important video. Okay, now I can't show you the whole video because it's what do you call it, copyrighted, right? I don't think I can, but I'll show you the most important clips, and once people know how easy it is to do this stuff, then we go from there, right? Because the first step in understanding this is how easy it is to control the weather, right? And the American government, along with some other countries, had this technology for at least 50 years, at least. Okay, so that's 50 years, right? Not 15, 50 years, okay? And this is when we all know, by the time a technology is revealed to the public, they've been doing it for at least 100 years before that, secretly, right, covertly. So when these guys came out with HARP, which is using radio frequencies to control the weather, they had to sign. One of the ways people say, well, how do you know this, or how can you prove it? Well, it's very easy. One way you can see the proof of it is all the nations of the world that had this technology, they had to sign a treaty with the UN, okay, the United Nations. They had to sign a treaty that said they will not use weather warfare techniques on other countries, right? They will not use technologies that manipulate weather in any form on other countries, or that will be seen as an act of war, right? Because obviously if you can mess with somebody's weather, you're going to affect their food production, you're going to affect all kinds of things, right? So the UN was right on top of that. They said, well, you can't, America can't just blast another country with tornadoes, let's say, right? So they signed that treaty. So, but if you're using your brain, it's like, well, obviously that left a big loophole to do what? To affect their own citizens, right? Because the treaty was you can't affect other countries, which makes sense. But if I'm the American government and I want to do whatever I want to do to my own civilians, well, guess what? It's completely legal, right? And people don't even know that, okay? So that's the first step, that they signed treaties on this because the technology became public, meaning, relative to the governments, that most people don't know about it and didn't, but the governments knew and they signed treaties. And the other aspect of that is that it didn't affect if the governments can do it on their own people, right? So if I'm a government, I say, well, these peasants over here are getting out of line and they're complaining about wanting more money or more welfare or whatever, well, let's do a little flood here or earthquake there and whatever, right? And they shut up really fast and they're happy to be alive, and look, they're coming to us for their rations, right? So okay, so you got to remember that, right? So we're going to watch something now that's going to show you the technology to do that, and then we're going to see the art. So that's the how, right? The how, okay? And then the why, we already went over it. We have a bunch of people that know the real creator, the force, the key, whatever you want to call it, the great architect of the universe. And those people are not like you, are not like the most of the people who are the masses, okay? They have an agenda. Their agenda is to use people as a resource, okay, to build the infrastructure for what they call heaven, okay, which I know sounds weird, like what is he talking about now? Well, heaven is like everything else in the Bible. It's an analogy that's misinterpreted by the masses, okay? The easiest way to think about it is not that H word, which is very loaded and reflexive, and everybody becomes, mentally deranged when they hear stuff like that. The best word is Atlantis, okay? They have an agenda to recreate Atlantis. And if you know what Atlantis is, it's actually based on the key, right? It's like a society. The easiest way to explain it fast is a tiered society of 7 layers. Okay, so let me say that again. Atlantis is a tiered society, meaning it's a class-based system that has 7 layers. Okay, and if you don't know this, or you didn't know this, or you never thought about thinking about it, guess what? You're on the bottom layer. Okay, so this is like a person that doesn't know how his toilet works and takes it for granted, and when his toilet stops working, he realizes really fast that he has to call a plumber and pay the guy $500 an hour just to fix his toilet. And some of you are saying, well, what are you talking about? What I'm saying is, if you're not aware that there's an agenda to make Atlantis, okay, which is a tiered 7-class system, then that automatically means you have no idea of what's going on, and therefore you're on the bottom. You're on the bottom layer, which is the most trash layer. It's considered like, again, there's a lot of media references for how bad that's seen. But think of it this way, okay? Think of a company. So the utmost layer, the 7th layer, is like the CEO, the boss, the person that owns the company, all that stuff. That's the 7th layer, right? The guy that sweeps the floor and cleans the toilets, he's at the bottom, right? And what do you know about the person that cleans the bathroom in any company? Well, they're the most expendable, right? So if that person even thinks for a second of asking for a raise or saying, I have rights, I want my rights not to clean toilets, I want to have a big office like the boss, well, how fast is he going to get thrown out the door, right? And another person comes in to replace him, okay? So that, of course, is exactly how society works. Like these Illuminati guys, they're not replaceable. They're very, they are replaceable, but they're very rare to find, very hard to make. There's very few people that have a brain that thinks about this kind of stuff, right? So, the guys that are on the top layer, there are very, very few of them, right? And as we all know, everybody should know, that 1% of the people own 98% of the wealth of the world, right? Like, what is it? 2% of the earth owns like 85, 90% of the resources and the money, right? So that's the layer. That's that layer for you, right? Whereas the 99%, the 98%, well, guess who those are? Those are the bottom layer, right? At the bottom, right? And they have nothing. We all know they're living day to day, right? So what you're getting at here is this end of the age process. It serves two functions. It eliminates, unfortunately, if people want to hear this or not, it's the top 1-2% basically taking action to eliminate the majority, which they see as the bottom, like the 99%, 99 percenters, right? And we know that's a song for ministry, like it is for a whole bunch of other stuff, which I can show you reference material. But that's supposed to be its own talk, right? Because you can see I'm supposed to show the earthquake stuff, but you see how it gets sidetracked, because people, it's hard to bring stuff like this out and have them understand, well, how would you believe this? Like, if somebody, the average person, is listening to a guy talk about earthquakes that are coming up and saying, look, here's some articles, and this is what they're telling you, most people won't believe it, not because they can't see what's in front of their face, but they can't fathom the point of it, right? It's like, well, why would anybody do an earthquake, right? But they don't understand. It's these top tier people that are finally saying, well, it's time for Judgment Day. You had your warnings. You had time to get your act together. We explained so much to you, but most people still want to party. They want to be oblivious. Like they don't want to change how they live, right? And that's a problem, because everybody's taking up space, right? It's like, it's like it or not, there's the more people there are and the fewer resources, even though I understand we're in a limited technology, like the technology has been capped, but that doesn't solve our problem. Like two people bickering, if there's better technology, doesn't solve the premise that they still have to worry about their resources that day. You know what I mean? I can't go steal somebody's stuff and say, well, blame the Illuminati because they're not giving us better technology. No, because you're going to say I'm a thief. I took your stuff. Well, that's what's happening in the world, right? Like people, they're taking up more and more space. They want more and more stuff. And these elite people, they have to put their foot down. They're saying, no, it's time to get the peasantry back in line, right? So, unfortunately, that's a easy way to explain this whole process, right? So now we're going to, we're gonna go do that video, and we're going to we see some parts that talk specific about the earthquake potential, okay? And then we're going to go into the articles. And so keep in mind, folks, this is October 20th, 21st. And you're seeing it here that it looks like there's going to be earthquakes in November, okay? So, and I have to start off by showing the date, actually, so people, because you got to remember, this is interesting, isn't it? If it's true that this is going to happen, then See people, this is what we're talking about. No common sense. How people behave. But anyways, so let's go over this now. So this video you're gonna watch it's called Holes in Heaven, Advances in Tesla Technology, right? Okay, so it's Holes in Heaven, HARP, and Advances in Tesla Technology. Okay. So I'm just gonna double check that we're seeing it. So I'm gonna activate it now. Alright, so let's go see it here. Okay, there we go. And what I'm gonna do is I have to refer to some notes, because in my notes I have the exact time for when this video is the best. So here we go. It's gonna have the intro to the 7 minutes, so that's gonna be about 6 minutes, and then there's another 5 minutes. So you're gonna see about 12 minutes of this video, and hopefully they don't mute the audio. And what I'm gonna do is pause it and explain what the guy said, just to make sure if the audio gets muted, you know, people still see what the, like, still know what they said, right? Okay, so let's go to it. So it's 0:45 seconds to 7 minutes.
The Earth is more unstable now. It wobbles more than it used to. The atmosphere is speeding up and the Earth is slowing down. The Earth's core is getting hotter. The magnetic north is changing. The sun is more active and older than we once thought. Everything is more unpredictable, and humans seem always willing to push things to the limit. The late Carl Sagan said, "We've arranged a global civilization in which most crucial elements profoundly depend on science and technology. We've also arranged things so that almost no one understands science or technology. We might get away with it for a while, but sooner or later, this combustible mixture of ignorance and power is going to blow up in our faces." Imagine the Earth's atmosphere, also known as the ionosphere, as a thick soap bubble. It is a membrane, a natural electrically charged shield around the Earth, protecting all life from deadly solar radiation.
We have to have the atmosphere for survival. I don't think we should do anything to damage it.
Without the ionosphere, I'd be fried, you'd be fried, all life on Earth would be fried.
In 1912, Nikola Tesla, a visionary genius, saw ways to tame the sky, to make the atmosphere glow. He developed alternating current, high-frequency radio technology, and free energy. He experimented with both high and low frequencies and electromagnetic waves. He envisioned altering the weather and creating shields around the Earth to protect us from missiles, and he claimed he knew how to split the Earth in two.
Now, folks, we're going to take a little break there, right? First, to avoid copyright infringement so it doesn't get muted, but also we're going to throw some common sense in this, okay? Because part of the psy-op, very prevalent nowadays, you know, that people get on YouTube. This is this is very common Illuminati tactic, okay? And whether you like that word Illuminati or not, basically it's a tactic that any intelligent person would use on lesser wise, let's use the word, you know, lesser wise people of lesser wisdom, and that's that they make idols out of everybody, okay? So one way, you know, they control this stuff, even though this, you know, you're going to get the nitty gritty as you watch this video. But if you seriously believe only one person in history knew this stuff, you know, you're crazy, right? Tesla is like Einstein and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I don't know, like Trump and all these other people. It's idol worship. So they understand that if you have 10,000 scientists working on something, if you're running a society, right? If you're herding the masses, right? Meaning you're leading the peasants. You know, it's very easy to do if you make an idol out of somebody for whatever part of society he's involved in. So what does that mean? That means like if you have politics, you have two or three people, campaigning that supposedly are running the whole country, right? Which is ridiculous. Like countries are run with think tanks, right? It takes thousands and thousands of people to run a country. It takes thousands and thousands of people to make this kind of technology, right? What you're about to see, like it takes it's a huge effort, a military effort, classified departments, black projects, all this stuff. So the fact that the YouTube is rife, meaning it's full of this, Tesla was the one man behind everything, and he knew all this stuff and nobody else didn't. That shows you it's all controlled, right? Because it's ridiculous to think one person somehow invented all this or controlled it all, or had like some kind of patent on it, right? Because obviously whatever Tesla knew, the government knew 50 years before, and they've already perfected it, and they just put Tesla out there to be the idol, so you can look at him and go, oh, Tesla was so smart, and nobody else knew that stuff. Same with Einstein. That's another big idol thrown out there for people to, And just a quick note about, well, why did they do that? Because then it becomes easy to hurt people, right? Then it's like if you can either kill that guy, or you say, you say Tesla was vegan, and now all of a sudden all the people worshiping Tesla, now they have to want to be vegan, and this is a very common tactic, right? Which is why the Bible says don't worship idols, right? Because the premise of that, besides the key and the creator and all that, is that you become easily manipulated, right? Like when you worship idols and you think one guy knows more than anybody else, or Trump is going to save us, and he all this nonsense, then you become susceptible to whatever Trump says or does, right? So I just want to point that out, because if you see this stuff about Tesla, it's, the government's already behind it all. He's funding him. They're funding Tesla, and he's just another pawn being used, right? And they happen to turn him into an idol because it's cool to talk about that guy, right? But that technology is well known by huge levels of government, right? It has nothing to do with Tesla, and that's it. It has to do with the government knows all this stuff, and they slowly release this information to benefit their agendas, right? And then they put Tesla as like the middleman there. So just keep that in mind. Okay, let's keep going. Give me one sec.
In 1985, Bernard Eastman applied for patents that could make some of these ideas real. Many claim that these patents have become the blueprint for HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program.
ARCO originally approached me in 1984 to find a use for the natural gas on the North Slope of Alaska, which they could not sell. To give you a feel for how much gas they asked me to find an application for, it was enough gas to produce all the electricity in the United States for a full year. I originated some ideas for military applications and beneficial civilian applications in which that gas would be converted into electricity.
Okay, guys, so I didn't realize I had that not muted, so I'm gonna replay that part muted so you guys can hear.
And creating shields around the Earth to protect us from missiles, and he claimed he knew how to split the Earth in two. In 1985, Bernard Eastland applied for patents that could make some of these ideas real. Many claim that these patents have become the blueprint for HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program.
ARCO originally approached me in 1984 to find a use for the natural gas on the North Slope of Alaska, which they could not sell. To give you a feel for how much gas they asked me to find an application for, it was enough gas to produce all the electricity in the United States for a full year. I originated some ideas for military applications and beneficial civilian applications in which that gas would be converted into electricity and they'd used to power some gigantic antennas.
What does HARP do? HARP is a large antenna where we beam radio frequency energy up into the upper atmosphere, and we create on a small scale what the sun normally does.
All right, so let's go over this there for a sec, okay? So HARP beams frequencies. That's the take-home point of all this, okay? Is that they have a machine that pumps out radio frequency waves, electromagnetic frequencies that affect things, you know. So the guy, he was talking about looking for natural gas, and we're gonna see how they did it in a sec. But one of the easiest ways, there's two easy analogies. Well, actually, they're literal, like ways to know how this works. Think of radar, and think of sound, and think of your microwave, okay? And those three things are going to help you understand that if you have a machine that can pump out frequencies, you're going to affect what they called at the beginning there, the ionosphere, which is like an atmosphere that encompasses the earth. It's like a shell, like you have an egg and you have an egg shell, right? So the earth is like the yolk and what's inside, and the ionosphere is like an eggshell. And just like a shell protects the egg, the ionosphere protects the earth, right? So what HARP does, using that technology, it pumps out these frequencies, and you're gonna see, I don't know if we're gonna see it today, but they bounce it. They can actually not only affect the ionosphere, but they can use the ionosphere to bounce their frequency back down onto Earth, okay? And that's how they get long-range effects out of this thing, right? So, so imagine you're shooting a water pistol and you shoot a stream of water, and if you hit a wall, that water will bounce off, right, and go somewhere else. So it's the same thing with HARP, that they're able to target specific parts of the Earth because, first of all, they can bounce their signal off the ionosphere. And secondly, because there's more than one HARP installation on Earth. There's a whole bunch of them at this point, okay? They're all over the Earth. They're in different countries, which again shows you that there's one group in control of all this. It's not that every country controls their own HARP. It's that HARP is worldwide because America owns, the people running America run the whole Earth. And I don't mean that as in America runs the Earth. I mean that as in the people who nobody knows about that control America are obviously controlling everything else on Earth, right? Okay, so let's keep going.
The reason we're trying to do this is because when you have disturbances in the ionosphere, we can't communicate with our satellites.
HARP began with a congressional insertion in the appropriations bill of fiscal year 1990. In essence, Congress directed the Defense Department to explore the potential for using the auroral regions for improving communications and navigation and surveillance. From there, the assignment came that the Navy and the Air Force were to manage the program. It is people from those two organizations that have worked together for the past 7 years.
Applications discussed in the patents included destroying missiles. Communications control and disruption were included. There were some other ideas, both to possibly modify weather and finally to lift a portion of the upper atmosphere further out into space where hopefully it would be able to deflect missile trajectories.
What we do by beaming up radio frequency up into the ionosphere, that radio frequency, when it hits molecules of atmosphere, it tends to make the subatomic particles inside move faster, and that increases their temperature. So you can bring their temperature up to 1,600 degrees or so.
So check this out, okay? So this is a hit of common sense we're gonna get right here. So you just heard the guy explain that they beam these frequencies, right? Radio frequencies, and then they make the subatomic particles vibrate at a higher rate, therefore heating up the ionosphere, right? Well, in case anybody knows how their microwave works, right? Because I said, knowing how a microwave works is one of the best ways to know how real this is. It's that simple, right? The way your microwave works, it's set at a frequency that affects water molecules, right? So what happens is if you put something in your microwave and you start radiating it, because it is radiation, it's electromagnetic frequencies, which is all radiation. And what happens is it makes the water molecules vibrate at a higher speed, which of course heats up your food, right? And what happens is that's also why if you put gas, if you put like a neon, like a plasma tube of light, like a light that uses gas, you can light it up. And a guy does that in this video, but I don't know where, maybe I'll look for it, but you can light up a light that has the gas in it because the microwave sends these frequencies out and causes it to light up. Now that's important to know for two reasons. One, because you can analogize that with northern Canada, right? Because northern Canada has those northern lights that most people should know about, and that's why it does that, because that's an example of the ionosphere glowing because it has a lot of charge from somewhere. Like the way North Pole works is a lot of charges are coming up to the North Pole and they're causing those northern lights in Canada, right? Which everybody knows. If you type northern lights, you'll see pictures of the sky glowing. But what's very interesting is not only can you do that in a microwave, and you know that that's a natural phenomenon in the North Pole or northern Canada, but the point is HAARP does that as well, and we're going to get into that later, which is all these earthquakes you've been seeing around the world, from Japan to Chile to some other ones. People were caught, and this is important because the internet is being scrubbed for this stuff, meaning they're taking these videos down. But a few years ago, you could have found videos of people holding up their cell phones to the sky when an earthquake was happening, which again includes Chile, includes Japan. And the sky was glowing. It was literally glowing these weird colors like pink and orange. And it wasn't a sunset, because it wasn't like a typical sunset where the sun is setting, it's beaming up, you know, orange and pink. What it was a very specific spot in the sky, and everywhere around it was blue, right? So you had this pink glow in the sky in these areas that were being earthquaked, and then all around it was just a blue sky, right? So what was happening is those were the areas where HAARP was being triangulated, meaning like different HAARP stations were beaming their waves, and they triangulated, meaning they all crossed on a certain spot, and that's where they did the earthquake. And people were catching those lights in the sky like a glow. That's the best word to use, is a glow. And that's what now you can see. If you think about it, that makes sense, because you know you can make gas lights glow in your microwave. We know the northern lights have that effect because of the magnetic fields there, and sure enough, that's how HAARP works, right? We just saw that. We saw that this guy says they beam these frequencies through the sky, through the ionosphere, and they heat up the particles, right? And when you can do that, you can do almost anything. We'll get into that later, but when you can, the key word is a differential. If you can make like a differential between a cold front and a hot front or warm front, if you do that in a certain way long enough, you can make hurricanes and tornadoes and all that stuff, right? And the earthquakes are done through resonance, which this can do too, and they'll talk about it and show you. But the important part for now is understand when this stuff is in effect, a lot of times will cause a glow, okay? And that's when you saw these videos of people showing these glowing skies in the earthquakes in Chile and Japan. And if you look for, we're going to touch on that later, but what's interesting is that the government is scrubbing those videos, meaning the way you cause misinformation to the public is you either remove something important or you put so much garbage that's disinfo, meaning like, you know, what you see now, if you put skies glowing during an earthquake, HAARP, right, you get a bunch of misinformation. You get people that are looking at fireworks, you get people that are looking at stuff blowing up in the street. And they're doing this on purpose because they don't want you to see how easy it is to see that it's being done through these frequencies, right? And that's what this guy's talking about, meaning the mechanics behind it. We're going to keep going. Okay, ready?
Which is normally what the sun does to those particles at that atmosphere.
The ionosphere of the Earth has got enormous amount of energy. There are 8,000 thunderstorms going on all over the Earth at any given moment. There are millions of amperes of electricity pouring to the Earth from lightning strikes, and HAARP could create a trigger effect.
In 1983, I did radiotomography with 30 watts, looking for oil in the ground. I found 26 oil wells over a 9-state area, and 100% of the time was accurate with just 30 watts of power beaming straight into solid rock. HAARP uses 1 billion watts beamed straight into the ionosphere for experiments. Picture these strings on the piano as layers of the Earth. Each one has its own frequency. What we used to do is beam radio waves into the ground, and it would vibrate any strings that were present in the ground. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's natural gas. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's crude oil. We were able to.
So, okay, we're gonna talk about that for a sec. And then we're going to rewind and watch this again, because this is the critical part of people and their disbelief that you can pull off an earthquake, right? They're like, no, there's no way, you know, blah, blah, blah. So it's like this. You already heard the guy start explaining how he's doing tomography, right? And if people don't quite know what he meant like with 30 watts, he beamed a frequency through the earth. And this is where understanding radar is important, because you beam the frequency through the earth and it bounces back, right? And depending on this, the signal he gets when it gets bounced back, he can tell what's in there, right? Whether it's natural gas, oil, or a bunch of rocks or whatever. And a good way to compare this to science that a lot of people hopefully had in high school, because this is pretty basic science, believe it or not, is that if you look at planets, right, if you ever read an astronomy book, they'll have these descriptions of the planets that sound almost ridiculously detailed, right? So they'll say, oh, Pluto is exactly, like the planet Pluto is exactly 98% helium and 1.2% hydrogen and 0.3% nitrogen and 0.1, and you're reading that and you're going, well, nobody's ever gone there, right? Like nobody ever went to Pluto, collected a sample and came back, right? So then you're wondering, well, how did these guys know this stuff, right? We're talking like they give you these pinpoint precision data of what makes up that planet. We're talking planets here, folks. So, and then you found out how. What they used was something called spectroscopy, right? Spectroscopy, right? So it's spectrum and scopy. And what it is they beam a light at these planets, okay? They beam a light, and then they get a reflection back, right? And we're talking technology in the early 1900s. It's not even that recent. This is like 1950s, 1930s. It's not even that recent. So the point is that using a spectrometer, you get like a bunch of different colors that line up, right? So you have like this line, and it shows you a bunch of different colors. Now, what's interesting is using that, they're able to know exactly what the planet is made up of, right? And how is that possible? Because when the light reflects, depending on the material it hits, a frequency comes back. So if it hits like, let's say, quartz, you'll get like a certain color coming back, because that's the frequency. If you hit helium or hydrogen, you get a certain color coming back. Why? Because the frequency is a color. A color is a frequency, and that color matches exactly the frequency that got bounced back. And because they already did test to say, well, if we get this color, and they already know, like if you do it on gold and you get a certain color back, or you do it on quartz or iron, and you get a certain color back, they already verified. Well, if it's iron, you get this color. If it, and when they get their color spectroscopy results, so they look at the color bar, they know what the materials are on the planet, right? So when this guy's saying he did tomography with 30 watts, he's saying he beamed a sound frequency or radar frequency, one of those, through the ground like a sound, and what he got back, he was able to, like he said, 100% accuracy, gauge what the material was, right? So we're not talking science fiction, right? We're talking serious science that's real world, right? It's real world proven and used, right? This isn't like a guy in his mom's basement dinking around thinking he knows something other people don't, right? It's very legitimate science. So we're going to rewind this because he goes on to say that he was using 30 watts, right? And then he's going to explain what happens if you're using billions, and that's what HARP does. It uses billions of watts. Okay, so let's watch this again.
Power beaming straight into solid rock. I found 26 oil wells over a 9-state area, and 100% of the time was accurate with just 30 watts of power beaming straight into solid rock. HARP uses 1 billion watts beam straight into the ionosphere for experiments. Picture these strings on the piano as layers of the earth. Each one has its own frequency. What we used to do is beam radio waves into the ground, and it would vibrate any strings that were present in the ground. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's natural gas. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say that's crude oil. We were able to identify each frequency. We accomplished this with just 30 watts of radio power. If you do this with 2 billion watts, the vibrations are so violent that the entire piano would shake. In fact, the whole house would shake. In fact, the vibrations could be so severe underground that could even cause an earthquake.
Okay, so did we get that, folks? That if you beam these frequencies at such high power and you cause resonance with the materials they're being beamed into, right? So if you resonate the frequency with the material you're beaming it into, right? So the kind of rock, the strata you're trying to affect, okay, you're gonna get what you're gonna get earthquakes. Okay, so we're gonna watch that again because that's so important. I think people might want to hear it again. So let's watch it one more time.
Area, and 100% of the time was accurate with just 30 watts of power beaming straight into solid rock. HARP uses 1 billion watts beam straight into the ionosphere for experiments. Picture these strings on the piano as layers of the earth. Each one has its own frequency. What we used to do is beam radio waves into the ground, and it would vibrate any strings that were present in the ground. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's natural gas. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say that's crude oil. We were able to identify each frequency. We accomplished this with just 30 watts of radio power. If you do this with 2 billion watts, the vibrations are so violent that the entire piano would shake. In fact, the whole house would shake. In fact, the vibrations could be so severe underground that could even cause an earthquake.
Okay, so now that's let that sink in, okay, folks? We know that's pretty basic science, and that's that. So now I'm gonna show you the next part of this. Okay, so let me just find it here. Give me a sec.
Complex
complimenting me for my contributions and assuring me that they would have formed the heart people of my contribution.
There was never any intention to build anything associated with what Mr. Eastland had proposed in his patent.
If you read the patents, I was thinking of ways to use it defensively. One was as an anti-satellite device. You could make these electrons in space and hurt a satellite. That could be used either for offense or defense. We could hurt the enemy's communications while maintaining ours, and I was interested to note that that was one of the things said in the HAARP basic technical document.
Star Wars was the state-of-the-art military technology of the 80s, but in the 90s and in the new millennium, it's going to be electromagnetic warfare.
What we do know about electromagnetic systems and electromagnetic warfare is becoming even more interesting. As late as April 28, 1997, U.S. Secretary of Defense Cohen announced at University of Georgia that, in fact, geophysical warfare was becoming a more intense problem. In fact, they even speculated that terrorist organizations would have systems that could modify weather, create volcanic eruptions, or even cause earthquakes using electromagnetic waves.
You know, earthquakes is another thing. We have had a lot of them, a lot of volcanoes more in the last few years. Whether or not that is just a cycle of happenings, because we've had a history of earthquakes and volcanoes throughout recorded history. But it just seems to me like that it's coming more often, and that there has to be some connection with some of the things that we as humans are doing to our Earth.
The issue of earthquakes has been, looked at by other specialists, even going back to the work of J.F. Gordon MacDonald when he was at UCLA in the late 60s. He was also a science advisor to Lyndon Johnson. He's a specialist in geophysical warfare. He asserted then if you could ever get enough energy in at just the right frequency and just the right waveform, you could in fact trigger these kinds of events. And I think that's exactly what the Secretary of Defense, Cohen, was saying just a few days ago, was it's this idea that now terrorists may possess this kind of technology. It's obvious. I mean, if we're concerned that terrorists have it, we certainly do.
Back in 1912, Nikola Tesla said it was possible to split the planet by combining the correct vibrations with the resonance of the planet itself.
The idea of affecting weather for many people, it gets to the point where you say, well, can that even be real? And when you go back in time, even to 1976, the United States, along with over 60 other countries, signed an accord where we agreed to not use weather manipulation as a weapon of war. This is before biological and chemical treaties, before many of the nuclear disarmament treaties. And yet, that was such a big threat in 76. Has the science progressed? Certainly.
We're in this sea of energy. We're in a sea of gases. We're in a sea of particles that are charged. And they're moving constantly, just like a current in the ocean, just like the wind in the atmosphere. This current forms. And you draw and you attract these particles. Well, Wilhelm Reich attracted these particles. He pointed it at the sky and he said, you want clouds to be built there? You got a drought? He would point the device at that place and clouds would form there.
In the 40s, there was interest in weather modification. That by the 50s, there was actual experimentation in that area. By the 1960s, that area had advanced substantially.
Well, there have been programs with salting cloud, salting things with silver iodide, and there's been some experiments where people from airplanes threw chaff out, the little pieces of metal, and tried to get those to absorb power.
We have done such damage to the thermal balance, to the hydrologic balance of this planet at this point. We are seeing more and more disasters. You have to watch the news. You have to notice these things. You can't just take Prozac and forget about it, and the next day you see the whole Ohio River Valley was just flooded. Billions of dollars of damage. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people left without homes. And they actually say that they can make weather. Well, tell me, have you noticed any good weather here lately?
So I like that. I like that part. Obviously, that had the earthquakes part in there, but I let it run for a bit longer because it's good to see what that guy was saying. But I'm gonna rewind it and we're going to listen to that earthquake thing again because, again, they signed treaties for it, so this is old news, right? Anybody that thinks this is somehow new or, amazing and is it real or whatever, you're behind the curve, right? Like if you don't know that the government's already been up to this stuff for over 50 years now, you know. Okay, so let's watch that part again 1 sec.
I was thinking of ways to use it defensively. One was as an anti-satellite device. You could make these electrons in space and hurt a satellite. That could be used either for offense or defense. We could hurt the enemy's communications while maintaining ours, and I was interested to note that that was one of the things said in the HARP basic technical document.
Star Wars was the state-of-the-art military technology of the 80s, but in the 90s and in the new millennium, it's going to be electromagnetic warfare.
What we do know about electromagnetic systems and electromagnetic warfare is becoming even more interesting. As late as April 28, 1997, U.S. Secretary of Defense Cohen announced at Georgia's University of Georgia.
Okay, now here's something interesting to point out, because if you watch the first hour, I can't believe it was an hour, but I was talking about they, right? I always use that term they, quote, they. You know, they're running the earth. Well, you know, the people running the earth, the serpents, the Illuminati, whatever, they have like a class that does their work, right? And it's interesting because if you play games, or even if you look at that Atlantis 7-tier structure, right, where you have the head people at the top, and then if you look at Egypt, if you look at the class system Egypt had, it was the pharaohs, right? So those are the top layer. And they had like the priests underneath, right? The priests, the merchants, the soldiers, and then the peasants. Like there was about 6-7 layers, and the peasants, which are the masses, which is most likely you. I hate to say that, I'm not trying to be offensive. But, you know, and then they had these classes ruling over them. But one thing that's interesting is a lot of people find this hard to believe when they watch movies or play video games, and you see like these evil priests, you know, like one I like myself is Conan, right? I always love Conan, and if you know, part of what this channel is about is working out and once in a while playing games like that. But it's interesting because if you watch that movie, what does he do? He goes around, and you know, the guys that he's fighting that came and destroyed his village, killed his relatives, right? It was these guys carrying this banner of snakes, right? The serpents, right? And then, of course, you know, he had to fight the underdogs, you know, the warriors, the soldiers, whatever you call them. But as he entered the serpent temple, you know, he saw the priests, right? The serpent priests. Like you saw those guys with the cloaks. And they would, like, change from snakes into people, right? Back and forth. So that's, like, another huge presentation in itself. But I dare you, anybody who thinks this is a joke, type Cohen. Okay, type Cohen in your browser and say meaning of Cohen. Okay, and believe it or not, it's priest. Okay, it actually means priest, and that's why you see Cain, Khan, and Cohen all over the place, right? Because like when it comes to politicians, when it comes to these big, huge areas of society that the masses don't get involved in, but are part of what's being used against them, meaning like finances, stocks, science, technology, you know, Cain, Khan, Cohen, these are, it literally means priest, right? And if you look at what they're priests for, it's the serpents, it's the Illuminati, right? The head, the top echelon of who runs the world, right? So believe it or not, like I don't want to start going on about this because we're going to go back to the earthquakes, but that movie Conan, okay, the story of Conan matches reality. Believe it or not, like we're not talking literal. We're not saying they shift into literal serpents. It's analogy. Like if you're here the first hour, it's analogy. It means that these people they shapeshift, as in they take the role of whatever they need to, right? So they'll 1 minute they'll say, "Oh, I'm a Democrat," the next I'm a Republic, the next I'm a feminist, the next I'm a vegan, whatever it takes, whatever clothing they have to put on themselves. You know, that phrase, wolf in sheep's clothing, right? These priest class do that all the time. And in this situation, you're seeing how the priest class is behind this technology, right? And you're going to see later, I'm going to show you a video of a guy that gives you the date on these earthquakes, which will be in November. And he's blatantly part of that class. right? Like, because I don't want to get into certain terms, because then you become politically incorrect and nobody knows what you're talking about and you're a hater and I don't know what. But there is a priest class, and Kohen, I'm going to do that right now actually, because people have to see this, is actually one of the names that's very common in this priest class, okay? And I'm gonna show you guys that now. So yeah, let me do that one sec. Okay, so you can still hear me while I do this. So let's check this out. Kohen meaning, we can leave that like that, or we can say priest, but we'll leave it like that. Now watch. Member of the priestly class having certain rights and duties. Okay, so, and you can even look on Wikipedia, which we know is you know, dubious source of information, but even these guys go on about it, right? And this they do a good job. They do a good job. So because it's Kohanim, right? Another thing too is you get into the Herodim, the Herodrum, which is, if you ever play Diablo, there's a what do you call it? The guys that talk about, you know, the evil's taken over. It's Herodrim in Diablo, right? So you go like this. Okay, so blah 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 blah, right? But what people don't know is there's actually something that's almost verbatim. I don't want to use these words, but I don't see. I should have saved this, but there's, what is it? But there's a name. Hold on a second. There's Herodim, okay, and there's variations of this. So there's Herodim, right? And this is also in Freemasonry, right? You see, Herodim. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think you guys are seeing this, right? Yeah. But the point is, this is an example of even in reality how this stuff goes by people, and they don't see that. So when you got some guy named Cohen writing laws regarding your, you know, weather control equipment, you know, you're actually looking at a priest class taking control of something that obviously the masses doesn't have control over, and sooner or later that priest class is going to use that on the masses, right? Because that's what priest means. It means to use that, we talked about the key, those higher powers of the creator, and you know how the universe works, and to keep the peasantry in line, right? Like it's like, okay, you have a bunch of peasants that don't know what you know, so it's your job to herd them, right? Like chattel, like herd, like, you know, your cattle or whatever. So let's keep going here, because we want to stick to the earthquakes for now.
That, in fact, geophysical warfare was becoming a more intense problem. In fact, they even speculated that terrorist organizations would have systems that could modify weather, create volcanic eruptions, or even cause earthquakes using electromagnetic waves.
You know, earthquakes is
Electromagnetic systems and electromagnetic warfare is becoming even more interesting. As late as April 28, 1997, U.S. Secretary of Defense Cohen announced at Georgia's University of Georgia that, in fact, geophysical warfare was becoming a more intense problem. In fact, they even speculated that terrorist organizations would have systems that could modify weather, create volcanic eruptions, or even cause earthquakes using electromagnetic waves.
You know, earthquakes is another thing. We have had a lot of them, a lot of volcanoes more in the last few years.
He was also a science. Earthquakes has been, you know, looked at by other specialists, even going back to the work of J.F. Gordon MacDonald when he was at UCLA in the late 60s. He was also a science advisor. Lyndon Johnson is a specialist in geophysical warfare. He asserted then if you could ever get enough energy in at just the right frequency and just the right waveform, you could in fact trigger these kinds of events. And I think that's exactly what the Secretary of Defense, Cohen, was saying just a few days ago, was it's this idea that now terrorists may possess this kind of technology. It's obvious. I mean, if we're concerned that terrorists have it, we certainly do.
Back in
So that guy nailed something, okay? He did a really good job, that speaker there that we saw speaking. Like you really have to give the guy credit, because if you know how to read between the lines of that video, you have like misinformation, you have these, like Cohen, right, who's a serpent priest, fantastic disinfo, whatever. They always got to play by that truth and lies formula, right? If you saw that video on the key I posted a week ago or whatever, I took down temporarily. Society's run by always giving you truth and lies, right? And one of the way you saw that play out right there was that Cohen said, well, this technology exists and we have to be careful that terrorists don't have it, right? And so you can tell right there's the truth and lies. So they're being honest with you that this technology exists, but then that serpent priest, of course, that's where they get the term forked tongue, speaking with a forked tongue, like you're one part of it is truth and goodness, and the other part is lies and baloney, right? But because then he says, well, terrorists have it. Well, you have to use your brain, and I'm glad that guy said what he said, because he said it very succinctly and blatantly, and he said, well, it's obvious, if supposedly terrorists have it, so supposedly some guys in a cave are going to have this massive technology to cause earthquakes. Like if that's a supposed probability, well, then you think your own government doesn't have it, who has billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, black ops, classified projects, military compartmentalization and all that. So you got to use your brain here, right, folks? And understand that if they're admitting in the 1990s, okay, that was 1997, so and that's old, right, because this technology became public in around the 1970s, so if they're saying that terrorists might have that in the 1990s, well, obviously your government had it has it now. They've had it for a long time, and they're the ones behind everything, right? Because we're not going to play silly games here and think a bunch of people, peasants in the deserts have this technology, but your government doesn't, right? So use your brain, right? Okay, so now we know how. Okay, so we see flat out the how of this. Okay, so we saw repeatedly, the people talking about this, and I'm just gonna, so we're gonna finish, so that video is done now, okay? So we finished that video, and because you see the how, that's like, there's no question about it, so I'm gonna review quick, just to review it. So it's like this. You have everything is electromagnetic in the universe, right? That's obvious. If it's not obvious now, So there'll be another talk. So it's electromagnetic, okay? It doesn't matter if it's the sky, your toenail, the thoughts in your brain, whatever. It has to do with electromagnetism, okay? This HAARP, high frequency auroral research project, I'm forgetting an A there, but it pumps out electromagnetic frequencies just like a microwave, right? But using, they can pick the frequency because a microwave is stuck at, I think, 3.4 gigahertz or something. But using HAARP, they can pump out whatever frequency they want and blast it anywhere they want, and affect whatever they're aiming their HAARP at, to get the end result, right? Which includes the ionosphere, which is the shell surrounding the Earth, and they can not only affect the ionosphere, but they can bounce it off the ionosphere to go through the Earth. So it's like this: it'll go into the sky, boom, and get bounced back down. So you can target something in the Earth, right? And now what they don't talk about there, but if you know any map making skills, right? If you're looking at a map and you're trying to figure out where you are and where you want to go, you have to use something called triangulation, right? Which is like you need 3 points to get to like a defined spot. So if you're saying, well, I'm here and I want to go there and my friends are over there, whatever, and we all need to meet, in order to give them a proper logistical mathematical equation for an end result point where you want to be, or you're trying to get to, you have to triangulate. So you start from, basically it means from 3 different directions you can get one spot, right? So XYZ, that's an easy way to think about it, like XYZ in space. So the point is, they have a bunch of harps all around the world, and by using different harp stations, at least 3 of them, they can triangulate and therefore hit any one spot directly in the earth. So if I'm trying to cause a hurricane or tornado or earthquake, I need to have 3 harps sending out a beam which will triangulate, meaning they'll all cross up, they'll meet, and in that one spot you'll get a powerful effect, right? Because if you just use one beam, it will be like a flashlight, right? Like you'll do a flashlight, it will only go so far, but you're not getting maximum intensity. So if you imagine if you have 3 different people kind of equidistant from each other, meaning they're equally far apart, like a triangle. So at any point in that triangle, if they flash their flashlights where the beams cross, right, you can get an extremely powerful point anywhere within that triangle. So using triangulation, you can send out these frequencies as a beam. And the guy told you too earlier, if any, I don't know if I showed that, but he said that Bernard Eastland, he said that HARP started off like a beam, which wasn't that powerful, but he said that if you understand how batteries work, they can be pulsed, right? And what that means is, even though it might not sound that powerful, like let's say 100,000 watts, right, as a continuous beam, he said that the military, after they did their public project with him involved, he said that the military then funded a second stage of it, to advanced stage, where they wanted it to be pulsed. And he said, and this is when they went black, meaning, it wasn't public sector anymore. And he said the reason that's important to know that is because it's like a battery. If you have a flashlight, like a moderately weak flashlight, you can move it around and it's a continuous beam. It's not a big deal. Like, you can kind of look at it and it annoys you and it's whatever. But he said if you can pulse something, it's like a flash on a camera, where it saves the energy, but it lets it out in a split second, which is extremely powerful. So the analogy he used was that if you flash a camera's, when you take a picture and the flash goes off, that's like a pulse. It's just a fraction of a second, and you have an extremely bright light, compared to like using a beam continuous mode, which is not as strong because it's not saving the energy. So he's saying HARP was designed, after it went classified, to become pulsed. So whatever they can do using a beam, you can now pulse it and get a much stronger effect. Okay, so let's review. We got something that can cause earthquakes. It can pinpoint any spot on Earth, and the government has it at billions of watts, which is like super crazy power. And like the guy using the piano showed you, you can easily cause earthquakes like that. And lastly, I want to use a real-life example that is pretty obvious to even the most hard-headed people, right? Even people that still don't want to get this. And that's, we all know, we went walking down the street at some point in our life, and some guy comes, in a car running down the street, and what do you hear? You hear this rap song, and it's like boom, 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 boom. And what happens is you also hear the car shaking, right? So what we know about that is that the guy's blasting music, right? So he's blasting music, okay. And what usually it's that hip hop or whatever, right? And it's got such low bass, right? That the way that music works and the way speakers work is, your ears can only hear a certain range of frequencies, right? So they'll hear like a certain range of treble down to a certain level of bass, right? So from high to low. So what happens is when you're watching these cars, and you notice it too because you feel it, is that you get to a point where the bass is so low that you don't actually hear it anymore. But what's happening is that your body's shaking. You get that like, if you go to a dance club, it's like woo, 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 and your gut's like shaking and whatever. And these cars are shaking because the bass is sub-audible, meaning it's lower than you can hear. And that's what they call about extremely low frequency. Like the bass is so low coming out of the speakers, you're not hearing it, but you're feeling it, right? And that's why it looks cool to have that kind of music, because it's like everybody's impressed because the bass is like so low that you're feeling it now, right? But what's happening is their cars shake at the same time, right? Because the bass is so low, it's making their cars shake. So that's how you got to think about it. It's these harp installations are pumping out frequencies. They're ELF, extremely low frequency, and you don't even hear it. Like you can be having that blasted right through your head right now, and you wouldn't notice, right? You wouldn't hear it. You wouldn't know what's happening. But if they triangulate an ELF, extremely low frequency wave that resonates with the ground you're on. So that's what the guy said with the piano strings. He said the strata of the earth that you can target with a frequency, right? If it's clay or if it's whatever, you target it with the same resonant frequency, causes resonance, meaning like you're matching up on the frequency of the rock. And then as you blast that, you're making like these tremors that if you keep doing it, it will go harder and harder until he said himself, you get earthquakes, and you can get massive earthquakes, like, you know. And so that's the how. Okay, so now we covered the how, and we know that they've been telling people this stuff for years in regards to, you know, Armageddon, end times, whatever. So we already know that whole end times thing. How many movies did we see? Like San Andreas. Like let me load it up here, because people probably, you know, don't want to get off the couch to look, but I'll do it. We're gonna look at that movie. This is an obvious one, okay? Obvious movie. I think it was with The Rock, of course, San Andreas movie. Is this the one? So okay, let me just, yeah, okay, so let me throw this up there. Okay, give me a sec here, folks. Okay, so we all know this movie, right? San Andreas, and it's with The Rock and Fault. San Andreas Fault, right? It's right in the name. You see, because they don't hide stuff, folks. I hate to tell you. I hate to tell you, this is not new, right? This has been shown to you and told to you and beaten into your head, and people are just blind, right? So this movie is about a big earthquake happening at the San Andreas, right? And you know, we all know that. But the point is, this is the most blatant example of that, okay? But in the media, they've been having this through everything, through books, through video games. So a lot of people that will watch my stream, they're gamers, right? And you have games like Quake, right? We all know that shooter game. Well, of all the names they give a shooter, why Quake? Right? Well, that's because they're giving you this message, right? And Quake was a hugely popular game. I think that game was awesome. I played it for, you know, a long time when it came out. Games like EverQuest, when you shorten it, it's EQ. What's short form for earthquake, right? You got games like Fault, which is a Paragon remake, and of all the names to give it, you give it Fault. We got that MMO called Rift, right? We're gonna sit here all day, and believe it or not, I planned on that. I planned on doing these talks to show you how loaded the media is with this stuff, right? But unfortunately, look, you know, this stuff is happening fast, so I have to throw this out there quick. Now, okay, so let's review. We know that we're talking about tribulation for a long time. Now I'm going to show you a rap video, which is going to be clipped, right? So what I'm going to do is first show the video, and they're probably gonna silence it, mute it, but I'm gonna show it anyways because everybody can look it up for themselves, and you're gonna see the images in the video, okay? And remember, it seems like a cheesy rap song, right? Back when it came out, everybody, of course, thought it's just a rap song. But pay attention to how the guys look, okay? They look the exact same as the guy running the harp installation. And, you know, you can figure out their last names because we already covered that, the priest class. So, and then you're going to see all the images of, you know, earthquakes and stuff like that. And then we're going to show you the lyrics, and then you're going to see how it all comes together, okay? Because like it or not, this stuff has been in people's face for a long time. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to go into the when, right? Because we know the why, we know the how, and we're gonna see a little rap song to show you an example of how blatant this has been throughout history, like the last generation or two of our media, and then we're gonna talk about when, and that's the articles, okay? Okay, so let's watch the clip.
Grammar.
All right, so you can see how kind of seemingly ridiculous that was, but it wasn't, because having the background of what we've been talking about for 2 hours, some of you are probably going like, wait a second, that this is starting to be a bit surreal, because you got these supposed cheesy rap people making supposedly cheesy rap songs, but you're talking about stuff that if you heard the lyrics, right? If you didn't, we're gonna go over it. So what you want now, right there, everybody's doesn't get the point. Remember, we started with there's a bunch of people that know this key, right? Which is the G word, the creator, whatever, and their agendas are different than the masses, right? Because the masses are selfish, they're animalistic. So what we already went over this. The masses want stuff for themselves. They want more money, more fun, more power. They don't think about harmony or getting along with other people, or how we're gonna make the world a better place or whatever, right? And when they do that, it's usually because they're fanatics to a cause, right? Which is just more evil. It's never good. Like if you join a cause that's not understanding how the universe actually works, then you're just being used as a tool, right, to push an agenda. But we're not going to get into that right now. But look at this rap song, okay? So I'm going to quickly go quick, and we're going to review the earthquake stuff more specific, but stuff like I get high, that I'm gone, that means remember, we already went over this, it means they're spiritual, they're extraterrestrial, so they get wisdom, they attain higher states of whatever you want to call it, understanding. And then remember, they got to leave, right? Because we already went over this. The societies collapse, and that's when they pull out, right? So everybody else suffers and dies, but they're like, well, I'm leaving on a jet plane, right? To quote another song, and everybody else is screwed. So, okay, so what you want though is, again, what is it you want? Like, do you want to get through Armageddon? Do you want to be part of the new world? Do you want to whatever? Or do you want to just have fun and frolic and then get caught off guard? So here we go with some of this stuff here. So take them down, right? So if you take something down, you collapse it, right? So that's your demolition, whatever. And how do you do that? Set loose, gonna shake them down, which is what, an earthquake, right? Let it flow like a mudslide. So again, that's earthquake. So death of perception, that's saying, do you understand what we're telling you, or are you just reading, face value, and you think it's all a joke? So, and again, they rub that in, because I vex why all, meaning like they're confusing you, right? So what you want, so this is a good one here, like the money you flaunt. So the people that are living their life based on money, well, how's that going to do you any good if an earthquake happens and you lose all your stuff, right? Your house breaks down. And So where do you get your information from? That's a classic, because again, is the TV going to tell you this? No, it's you have to get proper information. Like, hopefully you feel like you've had some of that here. So of course the bottom line is you think you confront when revelation comes, right? So as we know, we're in revelation time now, and this is exactly it. Like, what are people thinking? They're going to escape this based on how cool they think they are, right? Because you can't front on that, right? So here you got the serpent priest people, because again, Beastie Boys is Boys of the Beast, if you didn't, if that wasn't obvious enough. And they're all wearing hats, so figured that one out. The Cohen, we saw the Cohen, so these are part of the priestly class, believe it or not. I know it seems weird, and no, it can't be. Well, it is. You can't front on that, so this is another good part. Sweat is getting wet around the ring around your collar, meaning you see society breaking down and you know something's up, but you can't pinpoint it, but it's making you nervous. So again, because they know this is what happens, right? At the end of the age, this is, people start either becoming total escapists, meaning like, you just give up on everything and do drugs and watch porn and play video games all day or whatever, or you notice what's going on, and it starts making you nervous, right? So again, because we don't have time to go through all this, but it's the same thing. It's the blatant earthquake stuff related to the end of an age, right? So it's all over the place here. So this is one example out of a bazillion, okay, that was all around us, from the movies to and keep in mind, San Andreas was a recent movie, and that Beastie Boys song, I think, was in the mid-90s. So this is how far back and even farther it's been going. And another classic, another one that's been known for a long time, is that song, that Ring of Fire song with Johnny Cash, right? So that's another example of, actually, let's play that because it's a good song. This is another classic example, right? Because again, these guys have, when they do stuff, it's crazy how far ahead they plan stuff, right? To the average person, they can't imagine that for at least 60 years planning to earthquake them, right? And do all kinds of crazy weird stuff. So this is the Ring of Fire, right? Because you hear that song, you're like, well, what is he talking about, right? Oh, he broke up with his girlfriend or something. So what it actually is, and the lyrics, note the lyrics, he fell into, right? So if you have an earthquake, you're going to fall into it, right? Because it's going to make big cracks in the ground, and goodness knows where you're going to go and all that stuff. So it's this big plate, okay, that's all around these things here, right? And now what's interesting too, see, you can see San Andreas here, right? I'm actually, okay. You see San Andreas, the fault, you got that, right? So just look at this, okay? So remember, we're not trying to scare anybody, but we know the technology exists to do this, right? And you're starting to see how they put these messages out there, okay? So what are they saying here? That they're gonna earthquake all this area here? Like, is that what we're talking about? So another crazy part, okay, is I'll give you another example in the media. So this game, Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe, right? It's like a fighting game. We all gamers played it at some point. Sorry, I don't have ad block, so we gotta kind of skip these. Now this guy, I don't know. I haven't seen this guy's walkthrough, but you know what? I think this is not a good thing to do. Okay, the point is, in this game, the menu selection screen, if you look at the selection screen, they show you the Earth, and it has like these lines going through it, and it's very interesting because see, I should have had this done before. I don't know how if I can pull this off right now. It's taking too long. But basically, it's the Earth, and it has a bunch of weird lines going through it, like it's getting split apart. Okay, and the point is, if you look at it, it looks just like this. It's like all these lines going across the Earth, but it's like they're breaking apart. So we're just going over these little weird tidbits here and there. Okay, so now. We saw that. Now we're going to show you what I seen in April. Okay, so remember, knowing all that stuff, I had my eye open for this, right? Because it's like, okay, well, they've been doing this in the media for how long now? The technology exists. That Holes in Heaven was something they put out. Like, I think that was 1990s, a video from the 1990s. So again, we're talking 30 years, folks. We're talking over 20 years. They've put this information out there, and it's nothing's been hidden, right? But the big question was when. So okay, we know the why, we know the how, and now we're gonna get into the when. Okay. So this is what I seen in April, and after I seen this, I started talking to a few people. And I said, based on this, it looks like it's going to be November, okay? So again, I seen this in April, and I said, based on reading this article, it looks like they're telling people earthquakes are going to happen in November, okay? And then I saw other stuff very recent. So we're going to start with this and just show you how, if you read between the lines, how they tell you all this, okay? So let's get going here, okay? Ready? This is, I think, what everybody's been waiting for. But I had to kind of go through the other stuff. So we're at 2:06, so 2 hours in, we're gonna get to the gist. Okay, so here we go. This was the article. I seen this in MSN, and I saw this headline. I saw Airbnb's flame out in the COVID-19 could be whatever. Now, when I seen flame out, when I seen that term flame out, I knew right away I had to read this, right? Because this means death, right? This flame out, it means death. Okay, so if you know anything about mystery schools and secret societies and all that, it means basically you're extinguishing somebody's life force. Okay, because everybody is like a candle, right? They're flame, they have a flame, right? It's pretty obvious. So if you say you extinguish somebody's flame, it's like you're saying you kill them, right? So these words right here, flame out, means death, right? So when you see that, you say, well, I have to read it, right? Because they might tell you something important to give you important information. So let's keep going here. So Airbnb's flame out in the blah blah blah. So this is all interesting. So now let's go here to see. So amid all the bad news surrounding okay, so now I'm gonna assume you can read, right? And I'm gonna talk about the important parts, right? So amid the bad news surrounding this, there might be a bit of a silver lining. Okay, now again, this is a loaded term right here, because silver lining, believe it or not, is more death. Like silver means death, right? Because the sun is life, and the opposite of the sun is the moon, and the sun is gold, and the opposite of gold is silver, right? So this ties into that song "We Are Silver" by Moist. If I don't know if I should bother bringing it up, but if you look it up, it's by a band called Moist, and the song was Silver. It was called "We Are Silver," right? So you say, oh, that's ridiculous, whatever. But actually listen to the lyrics, right? So it's the same thing. You will be the first to fall. We are silver, right? Meaning you're going to be dead or dying. We're going to make you fall, which also ties into earthquakes. But the big point is we are silver, meaning we are death, right? So silver, so that means death. Home buyers, okay, when lockdown ends, they might find us, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so sudden flame out, right? So that's a loaded term. It means a bunch of death really fast. Okay, so again, sudden flame out means a bunch of death really quick. Now check this out. Whose hosts have seen a collapse. Okay, so when do things collapse? When there's an earthquake, and when the ground shakes and it goes all over the place and whatever, right? Now at this point, everybody's debating, saying, oh, no way, no way. Okay, but just keep reading, right? So Airbnb situation dire. Situation is dire. Okay, well that means it's perilous, right? Precarious, meaning something is in danger, right? If something is dire, that means it's dangerous, right? Okay, so let's keep going here. So here we're facing a much harsher new reality, right? So anybody that's been on top of this whole collapse of civilization things knows that the whole premise is that everything's going to shift seemingly overnight and become crazy, right? It's going to become very not like it used to be, right? Whether you're benefiting or not, the point is it's not like it used to be. So right here, this is another loaded term, facing a harsher new reality, right? So here you got the 666, which people can debate, but when you do this with your hand like that, it's 6, 6, and another 6, right? It's like Gillette and CERN and all that. Everybody knows that. That's pretty basic. You read this? Okay, so one major earthquake for the blah blah blah. One major earthquake came in November. Right now, remember when you're reading this, you can't take stuff literally. You have to read between the lines. So this is literal in the sense of earthquake, but they're saying came in November, which is past. But if you know, like back and forth, like the paradox, right? Because part of being illuminated is to know that black and white have equal footing, right? So it's like, well, the future and the past are equally important. So basically they're saying past, but what if it's the future? So one major earthquake in November. So you can read this right here to imply that they're telling you November is when the earthquake might happen, right? In Toronto or the surrounding effect. And because I live in Ontario, I'm paying attention to this because it's Toronto, right? If it was San Andreas, it wouldn't be a big deal. But because I'm in Ontario, I have to pay attention to this, right? So Toronto, they're talking about an earthquake November in Toronto. Right, so let's say you're saying no, like, okay, let's say you still think it's debatable, but just keep going, right? So look for the key words here. So creation of condo tower ghost hotels. Well, if you have a hotel full of ghosts, that means what? There's a bunch of people died there, right? That's what ghosts. When something's full of ghosts, it's like you had people, now you don't. Okay. Now check this out. This is where they start rubbing it in case there was any debate. Okay, watch this. The bylaw change came and went with only little media attention, but its meaning for for Airbnb in Canada is seismic. So let's go over that again. Its meaning in Canada is seismic. So if you had any debate about this stuff here, let's say you didn't believe the major earthquake in November, look, they use the same terminology again to rub it in, right? Its meaning is seismic. And if you know what seismic means, that's obviously have to do with earthquakes, right? It changes the business entirely. Okay? So right now they rubbed collapse again, revenue collapse again. So right there you had multiple semantic phrases implying earthquakes. Okay, so now 29, that's another loaded number. If you know, that's 36 and 26 and 29 and all that go together, right? And 29 and 26 usually has to do with death for whatever reason. We're not going to get into that right now. Now let's keep going here. And what's interesting is this. I seen this and I said, that's a interesting name, right? So again, remember, you had two references, three, four at this point. You saw collapse 2 times, seismic and earthquake. So all these are a complete match, right? But watch this. If you say no, that can't be right, like, who cares? Okay, so this name here, Petramala, believe it or not, that means rock of death. Okay, let's go over that again. Petramala means rock of death, like death by rock. Okay, so the reason that is because Petra comes from rock, from the Bible, right? Peter is the rock, right? And Peter comes from Petra, right? So it means stone, rock, etc. Right here, it's very blatant. Okay, so this is a place, but this place is named after the rock, right? Because it's rocks in that area. So Petra comes from ancient Greek rock. Okay. And what's interesting too is that also means the creator, right? Like, God, this and that, because the rock, like, the wrestler, interesting enough, the rock was in the movie San Andreas, right? So isn't that a bit weird, right? So now you have, but that's part of the Illuminati mind games, right? That if you're using your brain, who else is going to be in that movie other than a guy who signifies the rock? Because if you have an earthquake, it's a bunch of rocks. Right, and he's the good rock relative to all the bad rocks trying to kill you. But the point is, this Petra means rock, and what does Mala mean? Right, it also means creator, right? Because Petra, the rock, also stands for God, right? Like the God is the ultimate rock, the rock of foundation everything stands on. But Mala obviously means bad, right? It's Latin or Spanish, whatever root you want to use. Now, from malo, and you get mala, right, which is the whatever. But this, I didn't pre-prepare this, but anybody that knows anything about linguistics know that mal is bad, right? So you got meaning in French means bad, and malo is bad in Latin, right? Badly. So this Petramala, and this is how you get really creeped out here, because it's really blatant when you see what they're saying. When they say words like Petramala, they're saying bad rock of death, right? So something's bad, it's death. It's not life, it's not, growth, it's contraction. So here you have rock of death, right? Believe it or not. So there you go. And then it also means, the creator, the rock, and the dark side, right? So the dark side of creation is death, right? Because the cycle of life includes death, right? So you have, how many times did they rub that in? Okay, they rubbed that in there. So that's it. It's a pretty short article. So within this article, you saw a whole bunch of numerical symbolism, but you also saw them rub the earthquake in about 5 times, okay? So... And March 2 is also Aries. By the way, if anybody knows. So that's so think of the god of war. He's not bringing you life. He's going to bring you something else, right? So that's that. So I saw that in April, and I said, you know what? That looks very fishy, right? And So then I said I'm going to keep my eye out. I told people I know personally that it looks like the earthquake's going to be in November because of that. So I'm going to show you now what I've seen recently, and this is where it gets very creepy. And if you're, if you don't want to put up with what can happen, you might want to leave. But let's check out what I saw recently, and it really rubs it in. Okay. So I saw a video a few days ago, and I'm gonna load it up, and it's only a couple of minutes in the video, right? So we're gonna click it. Okay, we're gonna click, and we're gonna go down here. Okay, so I'm assuming we're all seeing this. I'm just gonna do it. Yeah, okay.
The title of my talk is America 2021, the threat.
So now remember, guys, we saw repeatedly how the media shows us this stuff, right? Gives us these messages, and we got this serpent priest class doing all this stuff, right? So we can see, I hate to say this, but they kind of look very similar, right? Because if you have a priest class, they're gonna only marry each other, right? So I don't want to get into it because it gets a bit weird and cheesy, but basically you can start picking these guys out simply because of how they look, because they're having, I know it sounds weird and this is another stream, but they actually have a lot of genetic damage, right? Because they're inbreeding so much that they have like a lot of weird problems with their health, right? And if you look at this guy, just kind of talking over quick just to point it out, you can see with how
incredible, you just let them sort of do their job, basically. So we've been experiencing that, and, if this will continue throughout the rest of the year, and really, next year, a lot of that kind of depends on what the government's going to do, what's going to happen in the election. The situation doesn't look pretty either way. I think, though, that we certainly, you could see some very seismic changes happening in November, and that could spill over into what's going to happen, and that the 2020s really.
Did we get that? We can see some very seismic changes happen in November. Okay, so let's go over that again. We can see some seismic changes happen in November. Did you catch how blatant that was? Let's watch it again.
Kind of depends on what the government's going to do, what's going to happen in the election. The situation doesn't look pretty either way. I think, though, that we certainly, you could see some very seismic changes happening in November, and that could spill over into what's going to happen, and that the.
Okay, so look how loaded that guy's talk was there. He said the government's going to do something. It's not going to be good. He blatantly said that. So right there, the government's going to do something. It's not going to be good. It's going to be bad. And we're going to see some seismic changes in November. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. And then he says, it's going to spill over into the next year. So let's do that one more time, folks, because I know people are like, huh?
Kind of depends on what the government's going to do, what's going to happen in the election. The situation doesn't look pretty either way. I think, though, that we certainly, you could see some very seismic changes happening in November, and that could spill over into what's going to happen, and that the 2020s, really 2021, is in really February 2021, sort of like the last.
Okay, So another thing, as you pay attention to this, right, as you look at your priest class, giving you tidbits of information in between the lines, you can tell a mile away how this guy's not speaking naturally, right? Do you notice how it's like he's trying to remember his lines, right? If you notice how he talks, he's like speaking fluidly like a person actually talking to you normally. He's like you can tell that he's trying to remember his line. So he's like, oh, I gotta tell them about this. What was the line again? I gotta use, So that when you see somebody talk like that, your sixth sense should come out and be like, well, he looks like he's having problems remembering his lines, right? And you might say, well, can't anybody have that problem? Not really, because if you have an honest conversation with somebody, it comes across honestly, right? But if you're trying to remember your lines because your real job is putting out this information to warn people, even though they're blind to it, that's how you're doing your job here, right? Like he looks like the same guys like everybody else, which I don't want to get into, but so let's just finish what he's saying here. But you can see how forced the guy looks. He's not speaking naturally. You can tell he's
You passed a lot of big federal laws. You could see another progressive era. Okay, so really a threat because these policies.
Did you catch that? Really a threat, right? So they just told you the government's going to do something. It's not going to be good. That there's going to be seismic changes in November, and then the one of the next things he says it's really a threat. Okay, well I don't know about you, but getting earthquake that's a pretty big threat, isn't it?
Policies are a threat to our economic freedoms, to our economic well-being, to our personal liberty, to our sanity, to our I definitely know my sanity, to our our psychological state of mind, etc. I mean these are things that could really cause a very serious a lot of serious problems.
Did you get that? So these are things that can cause a lot of serious problems. So within 2 minutes, more like 1 minute and 10 seconds, he said the government's going to do something. It's not going to be good. There's going to be seismic changes in November, which matches the B&B article. And then he goes on to say how it's going to cause all kinds of problems and hardships. It's a real threat, and he views that as a big problem, right? It's not good for his well-being. Well, duh, right? Duh. So this is what we're talking about, okay? So we got that one. So we covered that one. And I almost feel like running that over again. Another progressive era, really a threat, lots of serious problems. And by the way, the term progressive era, because he put that in there, he said could see another progressive era, really a threat. That's actually a play off New Age, right? Remember how we said the end of the age is, of course, the ending of one age and the start of a new one. Well, he just said that a progressive era means you're progressing into a new age, right? So you're progressing into a different age, a world, a era, eon, world, aeon. These are all meaning the same thing, right? So we're going into Aquarius. We're leaving Pisces, going into Aquarius. And he says, really a threat, a lot of serious problems. You see, because a lot of people think, well, we're going into Aquarius, we're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Well, that's ridiculous, right? Whenever you start a new system, it's like that Bible phrase, you can't put new wine into old wineskins, which means, common common speak is you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And basically, in order for the people to accept a new system, you either have to wipe them out or put them in such stress that they'll accept things they wouldn't have accepted before, right? Like we all know stuff from microchips to no cars, no gas, your food becoming totally disgusting, right? They want you to eat bugs instead of meat, which I don't want to get into that because it's, but that's a huge agenda, right? So I call that serpent speak, right? So that's like serpent speak. And the point of that was that I seen that just a few weeks ago. And it reinforced November, okay? So we seen again November, right? That's becoming the big the big thing here, right? So let me keep going here, because it's surprising how fast time goes by when you're talking about this stuff. So we covered Airbnb. Gonna close that. We covered this guy speaking. Let's do it one more time, actually, just in case people can't believe what they heard. Let's do it one more time.
Kind of depends on what the government's going to do, what's going to happen in the election. The situation doesn't look pretty either way. I mean, I think, though, that we certainly, you could see some very seismic changes happening in November, and that could spill over into what's going to happen, and that the 2020s, really 2021, is in really February 2021, sort of like the last, during the Great Recession, when you passed a lot of big federal laws, you could see another progressive era. Okay, so really a threat, because these policies are a threat to our economic freedoms, to our economic well-being, to our personal liberty, to our sanity, to our, I definitely know my sanity, to our, our psychological state of mind, etc. I mean, these are things that could really cause a very serious, a lot of serious problems. So that's why I said sort of the threat of progressivism, right?
Exactly. To bring the new world, like to progress the ages, you have a lot of bad stuff has to happen that people don't want to hear, but because they're very stuck in their way, right? Okay, so now let's watch. So that was blatant, right? So now we get this. Now I see this. Okay, so this. We get into something I seen even more recently. We're talking like days ago, right? And because I was checking up on that, and I said, well, how can I see? Yeah, because remember, I'm in Canada, right? So even if we know that people tend to think of themselves first, and before they worry about other people. So obviously, even if stuff happens in America, I'm kind of like, well, obviously I care, and that's why I do what I do, but I'm also interested in what's going to happen in Canada, right? To make sense out of all this. So we know that Airbnb had Toronto, but that guy's video had America, right? So right now we're kind of in between. So recently this came out, what was it, a week and a half ago, whatever it was. So it said Trudeau, and watch this, people. Trudeau says government is braced for disruptions, quote, disruptions in event of unclear U.S. election result. Okay, now remember, I found out that November is the end of the election result, right? And I didn't know that. I just said, well, it's November, it could be earthquakes. But now that I found out about November, now it's all coming together, right? So what kind of talk is this? Like, ask yourself, who would write an article that says Trudeau says government is braced for, quote, disruptions an event of unclear U.S. result. So what is that supposed to mean, right? So obviously you're supposed to fill in. Well, disruption means if something happens to where your food is coming from, if your grocery store is getting fruit from California, and they have some massive earthquake, and your food's not going to be coming anytime soon, right? The grocery stores aren't going to have what you're used to, right? So what is that? That's a disruption, right? So you're living your life, you do whatever you do day in, day out, not thinking too much about it. And if that gets disrupted, now you have a disruption, right? If something happens to the things you're used to happening, right, to going through, well, now you're disrupted, right? So isn't that a weird article to say for something that doesn't specify, right? Like, they don't specify anything other than saying there's potential disruptions after the elections, right? The election results. Because if you read it, because we're trying to go fast here, it's just a bunch of gibberish. It doesn't have anything specific, right, to say why. Okay, do you see what's happening here? So they don't tell you why. But it's like, if they're not clear, well, who can be clear about anything when it's all computer and programs and algorithms, right? So you can see here your serpent puppets. This guy's, these are all puppets, obviously, right? Everybody knows that. So, okay, so all outcomes. Well, what does that mean? Good and bad outcomes, right? So just look at this, folks. Disruptions, right? If that's not enough, look at this one. So again, the same thing, relatively recent. Ted Cruz says the November election could be a, quote, bloodbath of Watergate proportions for the GOP. So folks, who uses the term bloodbath, right? If you're trying to describe something, okay? Like you're talking about politics. Why would you say bloodbath, right? And I was telling somebody, because we were talking about it, and I said, like, think of it this way, right? If I phone a school, if I'm a student and I phone my school that I go to, if I'm in high school and I phone my school, if I leave a message, just think about this for a second. If I leave a message saying, when I come to school today, it's going to be a bloodbath, okay? How fast are the cops going to be called and sent to my house, right? Along with a whole bunch going to the school. Do you see what I mean? Like, think about it, right? If I go to work and I phone my work and I say, when I come to work today, it's going to be a bloodbath, right? You're going to have like 500 cops busting you down before you even take 2 steps out of your house, okay? So the point is, if these guys are using these words, bloodbath, to talk about the election results, okay, what is that telling you, right? So again, just this is all gibberish, but the key word is things like bloodbath, right? It's just incredible, right? So we already saw all those other things, okay? And so you got disruptions in Canada, bloodbath in the States. We already saw the media stuff talking about, earthquakes. We saw how HAARP does the earthquakes. And we saw timing on them, right? Meaning November, and then you have these guys here talking about bloodbaths and disruptions. So our thing has went on pretty long, so we're gonna wrap it up now. But we'll leave you with another one here, which is, I saw this thing, and I thought this was interesting because I was talking about people at COVID, right? When this COVID thing came out, and I knew right away, okay, like within a few seconds of seeing what was happening, because I found out about COVID pretty late, right? Because I don't watch TV, believe it or not. Somebody might think I'm some kind of paranoid that watches TV all day. No, it's the opposite. I don't watch TV. I don't watch elections. I got stuff I want to learn and other stuff I want to do. And the last thing I want to pay attention to is propaganda nonsense, right? But what happened was when this COVID started coming out, I told people, because they were like, oh, stay home, stay safe. And when it hit me what this COVID was doing, like making people stay home, and I told everybody, I said, no, you guys don't get it. Like when they tell you to stay home, now you realize time is short, right? Now is the time to start running, to start doing everything triple time, triple speed. Because this COVID is sending people up for being how should I put this? Because it's a family Twitch, whatever. But how should I put this? If you're the military, okay, and you're fighting a war, and you fight a war, let's say, like a strategy game, okay, you always need, the most important thing you need is intelligence on where the enemy is, like meaning, where the towns are, the people, the armies, the units, whatever. And what happens is if you're trying to get rid of sections of the population and your enemy and whatever, war, armies, whatever, the first thing you want to do is delineate, meaning you want to like separate the groups and how to target them, right? Because you don't want collateral damage, meaning if you have a bunch of people you consider important and you don't want to hurt. So you say, let's say a bunch of politicians live in Oakville, right? Or they live, I don't know where, like somewhere in whatever, land you imagine or you can relate to. So if you live in California, imagine where the rich people are, the politicians, and imagine where the poor people are, the masses. The first thing you got to do when you're going to start wiping out sections of groups is to have them stay in their place, right? Because if you have them intermingling, like if you have the rich, successful people or whatever, the politicians, whatever, taking a vacation where, like, let's say some poor people are, you know, and you do something to that poor zone, now you got collateral damage, right? So I realized right away this COVID is way more than people think, and they better kind of figure this out quick, because what it's doing is it's getting people to stay in their zone, right? Their designated zone, for lack of a better term, which means what? That from there they can go on and start eliminating sections that they want to eliminate, right? Because they don't want collateral damage. They want to, remember, even if they're doing earthquakes, they still want to pat themselves on the back that they're good people, because while it's a very specific area, they told everybody, you know, so if it happens to people that got caught in it, well, you know, they gave you the warning, so who cares, and that's it, and that other people will be okay, right? So this is what we're talking about, that they're separating people, they're assigning zones to everybody, right? You have your, you know, all these poor people here, you have the expendables, you have kind of important people but not really, then you have like people they want to keep alive. So this is all part of the whole, you know, kind of end of the age apocalyptic scenario, if you will, and it's setting everybody up. And the fact people can't see that, that's scary, right? Because if you're getting told to stay home and you can't go anywhere, that means it's you're being designated. You know, I hate to say it, I don't want to keep explaining it because it sounds scary, but it means you're being targeted. You're being like outlined as a group, and they're deciding if that group stays or not, right? And they've already decided a long time ago, and now they're going to start acting on it by the looks of it, right? So now I'm going to leave you with this, right? And because I told people that, and of course everybody thought, oh, it's crazy, you know, what are you talking about? COVID is real, and you know, that's another discussion, obviously. But and then I found out, just to show you an article I found, which is very telling, like very funny and ironic, is, you know, just read it for yourself. Could doomsday bunkers become the new normal? Okay, so that's the headline, but watch what it watch what this says here. When we were told to stay inside our homes, a portion of the population quietly went below ground, right? And here you see, you know, they show you a huge bunker, right? So, you know, what is that telling you, right? So, and 18, of course, is 666. You know, 6 plus 6 plus 6 is 18, and that's a triangle. So that's your Illuminati, you know, signal right there. But the point is, you know, it's something to talk about how people, you know, started going underground when this COVID started, because to them it's like the beginning of, you know, I hate to say it, but the beginning of the end, right? The end of the age. So, you know, I never even read that because it locked it off when I tried to, but now I'm actually able to see it, so I'm actually going to read it after, but... So there you have it, folks. So this is gonna leave you with a whole bunch of stuff to think about, and we're gonna leave it with that. And I hope my neighbor's not too mad because I'm talking past 10:30. But you know, if it helps save people's lives, well, what's more important, right? But anyways. So there you have it, and that's one of 3 videos I want to do very quick. So this is the earthquake one, and then I'm gonna do 2 more. I'm gonna do one on the key in Atlantis, which will involve re-uploading that one I took down, because I'm gonna edit out people's faces, right? I want to remain privacy. And I'm going to talk about it, right? Because that's really, you know, crazy for most people, even though it's complete reality. And then another one is I want to do a deconstruction of this awesome game called Inversion. I meant to do that like over a month ago. And it's an incredible game because everything is in that. If you know Inversion, it's like this guy, these people are in, wow, it's just incredible. Like I couldn't believe it. How good it was, because remember, all movies, all books, all music videos, they're all showing you the same stuff, but some do a better job than others. Like, for example, Conan is one of the best things you can ever watch because it shows you so clearly so much stuff. But another one like that inversion game is just incredible, right? Like I have to do a video on that, and it has everything in that, from the key to the fact that the whole place is being earthquaked, like it's literally falling apart. I mean, so that's as much about an earthquake as you can get. So I'm gonna try and do that relatively soon, and I'm gonna start earlier too, because it's like 11 o'clock where I am, which is very late. So I hope that helped you guys out. And by the way, the earthquake areas, let me show people. I don't think I showed. I'm gonna show guys this. Show you guys. And here's another CIA agent. And he did some of this, right? I didn't know about this either until only this year, because again, I believe it or not, I don't spend my time, watching weird stuff. I try not to, but eventually, you realize how much is hidden in the weirdest aspects. So this guy, who was supposedly some kind of prophet, so he was a CIA agent, he did talked about some maps. Now the most legitimate one I can imagine, and this shows you, this is extreme, right? And I mean, I hope it doesn't come to this, but what's interesting is it shows the main fault lines. This is the San Andreas here. This is, I think, here's the San Andreas, and here's the New Madrid, right? So let me just check that you guys are seeing this. No, you're not. So let me okay, here you go. So this is Edgar Casey, right, which is a CIA agent pretending to be some kind of prophet, but obviously, it's an agent. And what's important about this map here is you see, the San Andreas, and this is the New Madrid, right? Give me a break. Yeah, here we go. So this is the New Madrid, right? And you can see here, because other people have talked about this, I'm not just pulling a random map out like because of this guy, but it's just that this is the most well-known person. I didn't even know about this, right? But I just knew there would be big earthquakes. But what's interesting is this thing here shows you the St. Lawrence. And another good one too was Arthur C. Clarke. He wrote a book about a guy. Check this out, okay? This guy, if you thought this was surreal, watch this. Oh boy, ready, folks? Let's go over this. Ready? This is Richter 10. Now this was written 1996. We're getting a pattern here. They made that video on HARP 1996. That Beastie Boys, Boys of the Beast, earthquake rap song was 1996, around there. He writes a book, Richter 10. Now let's go over this, right? Hold on to your seats, okay? So the protagonist is Lewis Crane, and Crane is also a bird, right? Remember how we talked about extraterrestrial? If you're extraterrestrial, you're a bird, okay? So Crane is a bird, right? So he's extraterrestrial. So Lewis in a Lewis. The outsider, okay? Well, but let's never mind that. Who develops a hatred of earthquakes due to a major earthquake hitting his house when he's 7 years old. 7 is a loaded number, of course, because that's the hierarchy, right? That's creator, the rainbow 7. But anyways, Richter scale. So the plot deals with predicting earthquakes months or years in advance, and this and that. But the point is, check this out. So this guy, he becomes a crippled orphan, whatever, and he becomes a earthquake expert. But the point is, keep going here, right? His first prediction is island in Japan, right? So here, right here, didn't Japan have an earthquake? But the point is, see, look, by the time the dust settles, so this guy predicts it. So local authorities not only ignore his warnings, but vilify him. So on the predicted day of the earthquake, Crane had collected a lot of media organizations, whatever, and see, but the point is, the government doesn't want that. You see, so even though somebody was telling them when it's going to happen, the government isn't trying to help anybody. They stop him. So they arrest him, deport Crane as a fearmonger. And then, of course, the earthquake hits. So by the time the dust settles, Crane's predictions have come true, right? So look, so so basically the whole book, the important part is that this guy's watching these earthquakes. He's an outsider. He's an enlightened outsider, whatever you want, if you want to play that word game or not. The point is he's telling people when the stuff's going to happen. But the government does not help him do that. The government tries to stop him, actively stops him. And so, okay, so he's public, a few people are willing to take precautions. Many are not listening. The government silenced Crane. And of course, the quake hits as predicted, right? So spot welding. Okay, so basically he keeps going on. The whole book is about a guy who's predicting earthquakes, not based on craziness, but based on you know, his sense of science and, you know, what he's seeing around him. But the government is stopping him, right? Like they actively stopping him, and people don't listen and all that stuff. And so I just threw that out there. But one point in the book that's in that wiki thing didn't mention is that in the book he talks about a St. Lawrence. It's like the Laurent. I forget if it was the Laurentian fault line or St. Lawrence. But it in the book it actually starts here. If you look at a map, there's a huge fault right here. Okay, I'm assuming you guys can see that. It's like north. It's basically the top upper right of this map, and it starts here and it goes all through here. So this is the Laurentian fault line, which becomes the St. Lawrence fault line, and that's of course the St. Lawrence River in Quebec and all that in Canada. It goes down to here, and then it goes into the New Madrid, right? So this Edward Casey guy, who was some kind of agent, and I hope it doesn't become this crazy, but it does make sense, because if they do some massive earthquake, it's all going to go through here, right? These are all fault lines and they connect, and this is why people in southern Ontario are screwed if they're here, because there's tons of big cities here, right? So you got a whole bunch here, and if you live around here, it's obvious that it's easily floodable, right? Like if you upset the earth here, all this stuff will just flood, right? So again, we can be here 5 hours for the amount of games I've seen that show you this, right? That they're in areas of New York and this and that, and New York is like a bunch of collapsed buildings, and it's full of water, right? So these guys are running around, you know, shooting guns or whatever it is they're doing, and it's full of collapsed buildings and water all over the place, right? So you ask yourself, where did they get these scenarios from, right? Well, this is where they get them, because they got to show you all this stuff they're planning on doing, right? So there you go. So that's you know, the fault lines, and some idea of, you know, what can happen and what's going on. And you can tell it's hugely populated. These are all the most populated areas in the places. So anyways, that's it. So I hope that opened your eyes a bit, and I try to do a thorough job, so, you know, don't hate me if that took a while, because, you know, I'd rather be thorough than what do you call it, instead of negligent, right? I'd rather give you more information so you can have what you need than not give you enough, and then you're stuck wondering what's going on, right? Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I'm gonna sign out here, and see you guys soon for the inversion and that key one. Okay, remember, there is a big truth to everything. There is a big force. So it's a shame that I didn't get this out a lot earlier, because I didn't know how. I was very shy and whatever. So I hope I can make it through these earthquakes to bring people that key, right? Because without that key, you can't act good even if you wanted to. Let's put it that way. I know everybody thinks they're good and I'm the best and the smartest and the nicest, but unfortunately that's baloney. If you don't know like the truth behind everything, how everything works, how are you going to make the right decision in your actions, right? Which is like a scientific equation. If you don't have the equation you need to know to work on whatever it is you're working on, how are you going to make the proper decisions on what you're trying to achieve, right? So that's why these elite guys, these Kohen priests, these whatever, they're, they don't take the masses seriously, unfortunately, right? They're just there as cattle to be herded, right? And the Illuminati they're running the show. The priests are doing the legwork, right? They're the ones you've seen doing the music videos, the video games, the conferences, the revolutions, whatever. And the masses just get blown along, right? Like the Bible says, they blow back and forth, like they just go wherever the propaganda sends them, right? So we got to keep that in mind, okay? So that's it for tonight. Thanks, everybody. So I hope you learned something and talk soon.